Everyone thinks they know Loki's family. They picture Fenrir, the terrifying wolf,
Enough.
Jormungand, the
It's
world
just
serpent,
curious, Father.
and Hel, who rules the underworld with impeccable emotional detachment. Those three are famous enough to star in any saga, frightening enough to keep warriors awake at night, and tragic enough to give skalds endless material for poems that sound impressive even when they rhyme badly. But, my dear listener, the truth is much messier. Loki had more children. Many more. The kind of children that Asgard prefers to forget, because if people remember them, the great halls would never stop laughing or panicking. And that is where our story begins, with the children no one talks about. The ones who are more embarrassing than terrifying and more chaotic than apocalyptic. In fact, they are the reason we must tell this saga, as if it were a soap opera. Because, trust me, nothing about them is tidy. The first of these forgotten offspring was Sivist. Sivist was not born from a normal union, not even from a mischievous tryst or a drunken bargain. Sivist was born from an awkward pause. Yes, really. Loki once made a deal with silence itself, and from that long, uncomfortable moment Sivist emerged, carrying the power to stop conversations cold. Whenever Sivist entered a room, secrets spilled out, people froze mid-sentence, and dinner parties collapsed into shame. They were not evil, not cruel, just devastatingly awkward. Imagine the person who always says the wrong thing at the worst possible time, multiplied by 9 worlds. That is Sivist. The second child we must meet is Blunder. His mother was paperwork. Don't laugh, it happens. Loki once signed an oath in triplicate, and the triplicate gained a life of its own. From this bureaucratic miracle came Blunder, a boy with a sweet heart and a curse for clumsiness. He wants desperately to help, but every time he tries, disaster follows. He can trip over a shadow, topple a throne by accident, and save a friend only by setting 3 more on fire. If destiny ever needed a banana peel, it would look exactly like Blunder. And so, while Asgard worry about Fenrir's teeth, Jormungandr's coils, and Hel's rule, these two live quietly in the background, mostly ignored, occasionally noticed, and always underestimated. Which is a mistake, because ignored children tend to make the loudest stories. One fine day, Blunder decided to pay a visit to Thor. He carried a basket of muffins, because muffins soften even thunder. Blueberry, cinnamon, apology. Blunder had baked them all. He walked nervously into the Hall of Polite Weapons, where Thor trained with harmless hammers, and Sif kept hairpins sharp enough to terrify giants. The air smelled of oak and heroic sweat. Uncle Thor. Blunder called timidly. Thor growled from behind a practice dummy. Not your uncle. Blunder nodded quickly. Right, culturally imprecise. I'm learning. Thor stepped into view, hammer in hand, already frowning. He took one look at the boy, then at the basket, then at the ceiling as though appealing to lightning for patience. What are you? Thor asked. Blunder. The boy said proudly. Son of Loki. I brought muffins. Thor raised his hammer 3 dangerous inches. Blunder shoved the basket forward like a shield. They're really good muffins, he insisted. Also, I might have accidentally tripped over Ursa Minor. The bear is fine, but the ladle is now just a spoon. I'll fix it. Thor's eyes narrowed. He had fought world-ending serpents, wrestled giants, and once lost to a cat disguised as a sea, but nothing tested him quite like muffins from a son of Loki. At last he said, Eat one. Blunder, eager to please, stuffed one in his mouth. He chewed happily, swallowed, and beamed. Thor grunted. Fine. Sit. We'll discuss spoons later. Enter Sif, golden-haired, graceful, and far too intelligent for the company she keeps. She took in the sight of Blunder, Thor, and the basket in one glance. Smiling, she said, Hello, Blunder. I am Sif. This is my hall. Thor is still deciding whether you are a problem or a surprise. Blunder nearly cried with relief. I'm very good at being a surprise. And that, dear listener, is exactly the problem. Meanwhile, across town, Loki was pacing in his modest rental home, trying to rehearse excuses. He had set out a tea set, as though porcelain would make chaos respectable. Sivist, he said to his awkward child, Darling, whatever you do, don't go to Hall of Polite Weapons. Blunder has gone. Thor is there, and I am preventing disaster. Sivis nodded solemnly. I shouldn't go. Exactly, said Loki. So I will definitely go, Sivis replied. Loki froze. That is not. Why would you? Who taught you irony? You did, said Sivis, with the kind of guilty sincerity only an awkward pause can deliver. Back in the hall, Blunder was sitting nervously on a bench while Sif handed him muffins like a patient aunt. Thor muttered a list of reasons not to smite anyone before lunch, and then the door creaked open. Sivis entered, wrapped in her aura of unfinished sentences. The silence that followed was spectacular. Conversations in other rooms died. Spear stopped humming. A tapestry forgot what story was showing. Sivis whispered shy hello, and the air sagged under the weight of it. Blunder, desperate, blurted, "This is a Sivis. My sibling, we're family. We brought muffins." Sivis apologized instantly. The pause deepened, and secrets tumbled out into the void. Thor blushed at a memory of a prank he once enjoyed. Sif remembered a terrible haircut she pretended to like. In far-off kitchens, servants admitted to stealing goblets. Even Odin's ravens confessed to pantry crimes. The silence grew so thick that the walls themselves shifted. A hidden panel creaked open, and out slid a scroll sealed with Odin's ring. The label said, "Prophecy miscellaneous. Do not read during meal." Naturally, Sif read it immediately. The prophecy declared that when the unsung children of Loki gathered in the Hall of Polite Weapons, the sky would misplace its ceiling, a wolf would learn to laugh, and the end would arrive fashionably late. At that exact moment, the ceiling politely detached itself from the roof and placed itself on the lawn outside. Clouds peered in, shocked at the indecency. Thor groaned and reached for his hammer. Blunder panicked. Muffins rolled everywhere. Sivis apologized until shields sagged with guilt, and Sif kept everyone alive with the calm of a woman who has seen worse. Then Odin arrived. Of course he did. He has a sixth sense for property damage. He took one look at the missing ceiling, the prophecy, and Loki's two newest offspring, and groaned like a man who knows his folder labeled, "Things that won't happen if ignored," is about to get thinner. And that, dear listener, is how Blunder and Sivis finally entered the official family drama, much to Odin's despair, Thor's irritation, and Loki's secret delight. But prophecy does not sleep. And far away, Fenrir the wolf, upon hearing the news of siblings he had never met, did something dangerous, something Odin feared most. He laughed, and with that laugh, the sky tore just a little, like a dress stitched too tightly. Only a small rip, yes, but enough to promise that this story is going to be very, very messy. And honestly, aren't you glad? When Asgard wants to ignore a problem, it doesn't bury it, burn it, or even throw it off Bifrost into the void. No, Asgard builds a door. A very official, very ancient, very overcomplicated door. And on this door they place 9 locks, because 9 is sacred, dramatic, and extremely inconvenient. And on top of the 9 locks they put a sign, written in bold runes, that reads, "Please do not open until after the end." And then, like every bad landlord who paints over mold, they pretend the problem has been solved. This particular door, hidden in a dusty corridor behind a hall of polite weapons, had been waiting centuries for someone foolish enough to wiggle the handle. And if you've been paying attention, you already know exactly which god was hovering nearby with a grin and a terrible idea. Yes, Loki. Loki had the prophecy in his pocket, the ceiling still on the lawn, and 2 new children officially noticed by Odin. He needed a distraction, a big one, and the door was perfect. Now, before you gasp and protest, because I can hear you gasping to the narration, remember this. Loki never asks, "Should I open the door?" He only asks, "What happens if I open the door before anyone else does?" So Loki stood before the 9 locks and tapped his chin. Behind him, a raven perched, the one who cannot keep secrets, the one who had already stolen 3 sausages from Valhalla's pantry. "Don't," croaked the raven. "I haven't even touched it yet," Loki replied, hands already busy with the first lock. "Don't," repeated the raven. "You're very repetitive today," Loki said. "Have you tried variety? Perhaps reconsider, or bad idea, Loki, or my personal favorite, please, Father Chaos, let me live another week." The raven shook its head, but the first lock clicked anyway. because Lox and Loki have a complicated relationship. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hall, Sif was trying to keep Blunder from fainting and Sivus from apologizing the walls into collapse, though was pacing with Mjolnir muttering, "If Loki does something stupid, I will smash him. If he doesn't, I will smash him for not doing it sooner." Odin sat silently, pretending to think, which mostly meant glaring at nothing and hoping wisdom arrived like a late raven. But wisdom did not arrive. Trouble did. The second lock clicked. Then the third. The ravens squawked louder. By the fifth lock, the air began to smell like thunder that forgot its manners. By the eighth lock, the walls shook and the dust whispered, "No, no, no." And then the ninth lock. Oh, the ninth lock was different. It sighed, loudly, because yes, dear listener, even locks in Asgard have opinions. The ninth lock said, "Really? Now, after all these centuries of being very clear about after the end, couldn't you wait?" Loki, delighted, grinned. "You talk. Wonderful. That makes this easier." "Easier for what?" the lock demanded. "For opening you, of course." "No, no, no. That's not how this works," the lock protested. "We are symbolic, ceremonial, metaphorical. You can't just—" Click. The door shuddered. The hinges squealed in a way that suggested therapy. Dust flew into the air like confetti at the worst parade in history. And the raven, dramatic as always, screamed, "We're all going to die," before flying away to spread the gossip. The door swung inward. Behind it lay not treasure, not weapons, not even a broom closet. Behind it lay a corridor made of stone older than memory, humming faintly, as if it had been listening to the nine worlds snore in their sleep. And here's the part where I must pause, because you need context. This corridor was no ordinary passage. It was a forgotten vault of unused possibilities, the place where the universe stored all the ideas it had rejected but didn't want to delete. Every mistake, every what if, locked away until someone nosy opened the wrong door. And Loki? Loki lived for wrong doors. He stepped inside, smiling like a cat in a creamery, while the corridor stretched ahead, lined with shelves. On one shelf, a harp that had decided to be a sword. On another, a crown that whispered it was allergic to heads. And farther down, shadows that hummed songs no one had finished writing. Loki clapped his hands. "Perfect. I'll just borrow something harmless, make a little distraction, confuse Odin, save my children, and restore balance. Well, chaos, but same thing." He reached for the nearest object, a golden key ring holding 9 more keys, each glowing faintly. Behind him, the ninth lock shouted, "Don't touch that, it's my cousin." Too late. Loki jingled the keys, and the entire corridor woke up. Shelves rattled. Shadows giggled. The harp sword strummed itself off key. The vault of unused possibilities groaned open like a giant rolling out of bed, muttering, "What time is it?" Meanwhile, back in the council chamber, the prophecy scroll trembled on the table. Fenrir, lounging in the corner with crumbs in his fur, perked up. The scroll unfolded a new line, glowing faintly. "When the door of 9 forgets its duty, the unused will march, the wolf will grin wider, and destiny will trip over its own shoelaces." Thor read it aloud and groaned, always with the shoelaces. And then the floor shook. The corridor of unused possibilities did not stay politely hidden. It stretched, expanded, and suddenly connected itself to the hall of polite weapons. Out poured fragments of forgotten things. A broom that thought it was a dragon, a helmet that screamed compliments, and a giant who had been waiting centuries for his therapy appointment. Yes, a giant. His name was Ollie, and he had been locked away because the Norns decided he was too talkative to fit fate. He stepped out, blinking, holding a clipboard, and said, "Finally! I've been waiting to talk about my feelings." Thor raised his hammer. Sif raised her eyebrows. Blunder dropped 3 muffins. Sivist apologized of muffins. Fenrir laughed again, tail thumping so hard the rafters rattled. And Odin put his head in his hands, muttering, "Why do I even bother?" Loki, standing proudly in the middle of chaos with the key ring jingling, announced, "Surprise! Look, everyone, I found a new plot line." The giant Ollie nodded. Yes, and I would like to begin with my abandonment issues. And that, dear listener, is how a family drama about forgotten children became an even bigger mess. Starring doors with opinions, a vault full of rejected destiny, and a giant in desperate need of therapy. There are moments in every legend when the gods stop pretending they're in control and start improvising. This was one of those moments. A door with 9 locks had opened itself. A corridor of unused possibilities had poured its knickknacks into a hall of polite weapons. And a giant with a clipboard had introduced himself as Ollie, therapist by calling, prisoner by administrative error, and very much ready to get the universe on a better plan. Ollie was big in the way libraries are big. Not threatening, simply full. He wore a vest that might once have been a tent and spectacles that made him look like wisdom put on a beard for fun. He cleared his throat and announced, in a voice that made the rafters lean in, "We will begin with names, preferred pronouns, presenting anxieties, and whether you recently opened any metaphorical doors that should have stayed shut." Thor gripped his hammer, which hummed unhappily at the notion of sharing. Sif folded her arms with the serenity of a woman who could bake bread and a strategic plan at the same time. Odin sat like a court order. Loki jingled a 9-key ring as if it were a charm bracelet that could excuse everything. Blunder smiled bravely, determined to be helpful, and immediately sat on a ceremonial spear. Sivas apologized for the spear, the floor, 3 ancestors, and a confused tapestry that switched to an abstract pattern as a defense mechanism. Fenrir sprawled in the corner, tail sweeping the flagstones, eyes bright with the kind of interest wolves reserve for sleds, gossip, and snacks. The ravens perched above him like quotation marks trying to keep up. "Wonderful," Ollie said, as if none of this were unusual. "We'll start with a grounding exercise. Feet on the floor. Breathe in as if the air tastes like victory. Breathe out as if the past is not in charge." Odin did not breathe. He audited. Thor tried, accidentally inhaled a muffin crumb, coughed thunder, and apologized to Sif. Blunder followed directions so hard he nearly hyperventilated from earnestness. Sivas breathed and the room paused again, everything leaning toward confession. "Not yet," Ollie said gently, and Sivas, startled that someone could tell their power to behave, nodded and tucked the paws back into their shoulders like a shawl. "Introductions," Ollie continued. "Name, fear, and one thing you wish others understood." Thor went first because sitting still was starting to look like surrender. "Thor, fear cats." He winced. "Long story. Don't ask. One thing, I am not angry. I am loud." Sif said, "Sif, fear, running out of flour before guests stop arriving. One thing, keeping the roof on is not the same as agreeing with a storm." Odin said, "Odin, fear prophecy." He cleared his throat and tried again. "Fear, being correct in the wrong direction. One thing, I file things under miscellaneous when I don't want to look at them." The ravens nodded in tragic, enabling solidarity. Loki, who never misses a stage, made a little bow. "Loki, fear, boredom. One thing, mischief is often simply honesty with a better hat." He jingled the keys and smiled at Ollie like a child asking if homework could be optional on account of charm. Blunder said, "Blunder, fear, being in the way. One thing, I really do help, just not on purpose yet." He lifted a hand to wave and knocked over 3 ceremonial cups in a neat rhythm that suggested talent if you tilted your head. Sivas spoke last carefully. "Sivas, fear, existing too loudly. One thing, I don't want to ruin rooms. I want them to tell the truth without breaking." Ollie beamed as if someone had finally named the plot. "Lovely. We will work on boundaries, on breath, on not opening doors with metaphysical signage. Speaking of which," he added, turning slowly toward Loki, "did you read the sign?" Loki said, "I am allergic to signs." "And yet strangely attracted," Ollie said, "common in tricksters. We can treat." Before anyone could relax into the unfamiliar experience of safety, the prophecy scroll on the table unrolled itself another inch. The ink wrote as it spoke, because drama loves a flourish. When truth is named in a room of weapons, the sky will apply for a transfer. A sound like silk snagging on a nail rippled across the hall. Everyone looked up, The small tear in the sky that formed when Fenrir first laughed. Remember that fashionable neckline. Stretched, then pinched, then stretched again, as if the heavens themselves were filling out a form. If you listened closely, you could hear the rustle of cosmic paperwork. Application received, murmured the air, in the bored voice of an immortal clerk. Processing time unspecified. Odin pinched the bridge of his nose. If the sky resigns, he said, we will need a second roof. Sif said, we already do. Thor said, I'll hold it up. Ali said, we will hold up together. Blunder said, I have string. Sivus whispered, please don't leave, to the sky, which is a kind of sentence that explains Sivus completely. At that exact moment, as if summoned by the scent of an overcomplicated day, another of Loki's unrecorded children arrived. She did not walk in. She happened in, the way a thought happens before you decide whether to finish it. She was very small and very bright, and changed her height and hairstyle twice in the time it took everyone to blink. She said, Hi, I'm Ivja. Loki winced, but only in his soul. Ah, he said lightly, Ivja. Odin closed his eye. Conditional tense, he muttered, as if asked the great homework he hadn't assigned. Daughter of Loki and a word, if. Ivja beamed. That's me. If this, if that, if we all made better choices 5 minutes ago. I make branches. She waved, and 3 alternative versions of her wave manifested beside the original, each one slightly different. Each one ending in a separate possible future where someone did not drop a cup or did, or caught it and invented a dance. The hall wobbled, not physically, but narratively, which is worse. Threads of what if fluttered across everyone's faces. If Thor had not wrestled that cat. If Odin had filed a prophecy under important honestly. If Sif had said no to hosting children and yes to a vacation. If Loki had kept his hands in his pockets for once in his life. The air filled with unchosen roads, all pointing at the same problem. Choice is a door all by itself. Ali clapped his big hands, gently, as you clap for a baby that has discovered his feet, but is currently considering tightrope walking. Welcome, Ivja, he said. In this room we practice one path at a time. We can note the others without letting them drive. Ivja nodded enthusiastically and accidentally split into 2 for a second, then recombined with little pop like cork from Fate's bottle. Okay. I can help by suggesting the 28 best options for every action. Option 1, don't open any more doors. Option 2, make 9 new doors and see which ones complain. Option 3. Option breathe, Ali said. She blinked and, to her own surprise, obeyed. The branches dimmed. The room held. Of course that was the exact moment Blunder, in a heroic attempt to tidy, picked up the harp that had decided to be a sword. It hummed in his hands and then sang, a bright, eager note that made all the mirrors in the corridor of unused possibilities turn their faces and ask to be seen. The note stung, not painful, but embarrassingly sincere, like a love confession shouted at lunch. Fenrir snorted. It was not his fault. Sincere notes tickle wolves. His shoulders shook, his ears flattened. And then he laughed again, a delighted hack that turned into a howl that turned into a bass line the world remembered from before it pretended to be serious. The sky's application fluttered. The tear widened politely another inch, as if trying on freedom in the mirror. Containment, Odin said, which is what Odin says when he has already lost round 1, and is inventing a new game mid-speech. Sif reached for Blunder, palm up, the universal sign for give Annie the weaponized instrument. Blunder handed it over, and Sif, who could make flower obey, coaxed the harp sword into a lullaby. The note softened into warmth. Fenrir's laugh subsided to a grin. The sky, hearing a bedtime song, stopped tearing long enough to consider whether it might like to stay on as a skylight. Progress, Ali said. Thor, please name something you cannot hit into cooperation. Thor scowled, then, to the surprise of everyone who had known him as long as thunder, said, my own expectations. Sif's eyes shone. Ali nodded like a priest who just heard a confession that changed the season. Loki rolled the keys across his knuckles and tried to look bored by growth. Ivja, Ali said, please offer exactly one choice the next hour. If Jafro smiled tremoring, then managed, we could have tea. The ravens approved loudly. Tea prevents many wars. Sif made tea appear because some people are magic without spells. The steam rose like a new paragraph everyone could agree on. While we sip, Ollie went on. We will establish a safety plan. No new doors. No reading scrolls during meals. Fenrir will laugh outdoors when possible. Fenrir wagged. Outdoors is a flexible concept when ceilings go on lawns. Odin will take the folder labeled things that won't happen if we ignore them and move it to things that are already happening. Please address politely. Odin glared, then sighed like a mountain, choosing not to be difficult, and said, Fine. Loki will return the 9 keys. Ollie said. Loki smiled like a fox at a fence. Return is such a cruel word. What about lend back later with improvements? Return. Ollie repeated in the room, including 3 gods, a wolf, 2 birds, an awkward pause with a heart, a walking contract with big hopes, a conditional tense and boots, and a harp sword doing its best. Looked at Loki the way good friends look at someone they intend to keep. Loki's grin thinned. His fingers stopped. One by one, the keys chimed back onto the ring. For once, he let the sound of obedience be the joke and the lesson both. He set the ring on the table. The 9th lock sighed in gratitude from the doorway. Then, because it was still a lock with pride, muttered, About time. Tea was poured. It is important to tell you this because in a saga full of doors and rips and wolves, tea is proof of civilization. People sat. The air opened its chest. Ollie adjusted his spectacles. Now, he said, we will talk about consequences, and availability, and childcare. Blunder and Civis need tasks they can fail safely at until they learn to succeed. Ifjin needs a list of 3 choices a day, not 30. Fenrir needs laughter lessons with exits. Thor needs to practice asking for help before lifting roofs. Sif needs helpers who return plates. Odin needs to confess which prophecies he hid because they embarrassed him. Loki needs the job with accountability. Everyone stared at Loki as if handed a rare animal that might bite. Loki stared back, delighted and horrified. Accountability is an art form he had skipped. Yet even tricksters want to belong somewhere that survives them. Fine, he said. I will be director of creative problems. I will break things on purpose where breaking teaches better building. Ollie smiled. Titles are cheap. Hours are currency. We will review in a week. The prophecy scroll, perhaps moved by all this emotional competence, rustled with new line, and this shocked even me. Your narrator wrote it small, as if not wanting to interrupt. When a trickster keeps one promise, the end puts on sensible shoes and walks slower. Ifja pointed at the words, delighted, look, cause and effect. Civist exhaled, without collapsing a single conversation. Blunder reached for a cup and did not knock it over. Thor leaned back and let his shoulders drop. Sif set another plate and trusted it to stay where it was. Odin wrote a note to himself that read, check the folder before breakfast. Fenrir dozed, one paw twitching toward dreams that did not immediately involve devouring the sun. The ravens cleaned their beaks and pretended they had not cried earlier when Sif harmonized with the kettle. This would have been a perfect ending for a day that began with 9 locks and a terrible idea. But sagas love cliffhangers the way gods love attention. So allow me to report what happened at the last sip. From the corridor of unused possibilities, a draft drifted in, carrying the smell of winter that has memorized your schedule. The harp sword quivered. The 9 keys on the table rattled, as if choosing names. One leapt lightly, flew the length of the hall, and settled against Blunder's palm like a tame bee deciding on a flower. Another rolled Sif's plate and stopped, polite as a guest. A third skittered to Fenrir's paw, rested there and did not melt. The remaining 6 tilted toward people I cannot yet name, because the narrator must keep 1 or 2 secrets to survive. Ollie frowned at the key in Blunder's hand, the only frown he had given all day. Interesting, he said softly. The door thinks we are not finished. Loki's smile returned with interest. We never are. Outside, the Sky's application to transfer stamped itself pending, then added, in a flourish of cosmic handwriting, subject to improved working conditions. which, translated from bureaucracy, means keep going. And so we will. But for tonight, drink your tea. Practice breathing like victory. And if a door with 9 locks sighs in your hallway, tell it kindly that you have group therapy now, and it can make an appointment. Next time, we will discover what Blunder's key opens, why Sif's key hums like a beehive, and what exactly Fenrir intends to do with a key when there's no pockets. Spoiler, it jingles like trouble. The morning after tea, that miraculous pause where gods, giants, wolves, and awkward metaphors all agreed not to end the world before bedtime. The Hall of Polite Weapons looked less like a council chamber and more like a toy chest tipped over by fate. The harp sword still hummed lullabies under Sif's chair. The prophecy scroll lay curled like a cat, pretending it hadn't written itself overnight. And on the table, 7 keys jingled faintly, as if rehearsing introductions. Everyone noticed the distribution problem. Blunder had 1 key stuck to his palm like honey on a child's fingers. Sif had 1 resting politely on her plate, humming in harmony with her hair. Fenrir had 1 lying across his paw, jingling every time his tail thumped the floor. The other 6 rolled back and forth in boredom, waiting to decide who deserved them. Odin stared at the scene as if trying to write a law no one else would obey. His eye narrowed. Keys are for locks, he declared. Locks are for doors. Doors are for boundaries. We will collect them, store them, and forget them. Loki stretched like a cat who had heard the word no, and found it hilarious. Ah, boundaries, he purred. Wonderful things to cross. The keys chose All-Father. You can't unchoose a choice made by fate. Fate bends. Odin snapped. Not for you, Loki replied, with the kind of grin that makes prophecies twitch. Blunder, meanwhile, was staring at his hand in horror. I didn't take it, he babbled. It just stuck. I tried to put it down. It followed me to bed. It jingled when I sneezed. Thor leaned over, peering at the glowing metal. Does it hurt? No. But it hums when I worry, Blunder admitted, which was unfortunate, because Blunder worried constantly. The key gave a nervous buzz to prove his point. Sif, by contrast, was calm. She lifted her key off the plate. It sang softly, steady and warm, like bread rising in an oven. She tucked it into her hair and said, This one knows its place. Fenrir looked down at his own key. What's a pocket, he asked. Thor blinked. It's a small bag sewn into trousers. I don't wear trousers, Fenrir pointed out correctly. So what do I do with it? Carry it in my teeth? Swallow it. Don't you dare. Odin barked. Fenrir grinned. Relax. I'll invent my own pocket. With a sweep of his paw, he pressed the key against the fur of his chest, and the fur closed around it like a sheath. The jingling continued, muffled but smug. Fenrir wagged his tail proudly. Pocket achieved. Sivist, who had been trying to disappear into the wall out of sheer apology, whispered, Maybe the keys want to be used. The moment they said it, the room paused, heavy and thick. Truth had slipped out again. Everyone turned. Ollie the giant therapist adjusted his spectacles. They are tools of possibility, he said. Unused, they are dangerous. Used, they are also dangerous, but at least intentional. Odin glared. You are not in charge of intention. Neither are you, Ollie said mildly. That's the point of therapy. The prophecy scroll unfurled another inch, because of course it did. When wolves invent pockets, immortals hold possibility in trembling hands. The High One will redefine control. Odin growled, I will not be defined by ink. But even as he spoke, the keys rattled louder as if amused. The 6 unclaimed ones skittered across the table, rolling toward potential owners. One clattered against Thor's hammer. Another stopped at Sif's second plate. A third bumped into Ifja, who immediately split into 2 versions of herself just to test whether she could hold 2 keys at once. She could, and both jingled in harmony, because destiny has a sense of humor. The 4th slid toward Sivist, who panicked. No, I'll ruin it, they cried. The key landed anyway, humming with the kind of pause that waits for honesty. Sivist cradled it reluctantly, as if holding a confession too sharp to drop. The 5th key rolled to Ollie, who picked it up gently. Thank you, he told it, because giants raised in isolation know the value of polite conversation. The key sighed like a lock relieved to have an audience. And the six? The six spun in a circle, rattled, leapt into the air, and disappeared into the tear in the sky. Everyone froze. The tear flickered, widened slightly, and then closed, burping out a piece of parchment stamped "Processing." Odin's jaw tightened. "Control," he muttered. "Yes, I will redefine it. Control is not stopping events. It is renaming them until they obey." "Ah," Loki said cheerfully. "So when the sky falls, you'll call it sealing relocation again?" Sif gave him a look sharp enough to shave stone. "Don't encourage him." Fenrir yawned, jingling smugly. Blunder's key hummed anxiously. Sivis apologized of theirs. Ifjim multiplied into a small chorus of options before Ollie reminded her to breathe. And Odin sat in silence, rewriting the dictionary in his head. Because sometimes, dear listener, control is not about keeping keys locked away. It is about convincing yourself you're still the one writing the saga, even while the saga keeps turning the page without permission. And somewhere, deep in a vault of unused possibilities, a door whispered, 7 keys remain, 7 stories to open. Choose wisely or not at all, which, in Asgard, is the same thing. Morning in Asgard is supposed to begin with trumpets, golden light, and ravens delivering dignified news. Instead, it began with Blunder's key humming at such a nervous pitch that every mirror in the Hall of Polite Weapons cracked in sympathy. He had tried to sleep, but the key refused, buzzing whenever he turned over. By dawn, he looked like someone who had wrestled a thunderstorm and lost, which, in fairness, was a family tradition. "Make it stop," Blunder pleaded, holding up the glowing metal to anyone willing to look. Thor squinted at it, like a man examining a riddle written by children. Sif pressed her hand over it and listened as if it were dough rising too fast. Loki, of course, leaned in close and whispered, "Sing louder." The key hummed in delight, proving once again that Loki should never be trusted near anything that responds to encouragement. Finally, Ollie the therapist giant declared, "It wants to be used. Keys that sing without locks are asking for purpose." "Or trouble," Odin muttered. "Same thing," Loki said brightly. And so, because fate never waits for consent, Blunder tripped over his own feet, landed against a wall, and click! The key slid neatly into a lock no one had noticed before. The wall shuddered, groaned, and split open to reveal a staircase curling downward, lit by lanterns that were not supposed to be lit, yet somehow had been waiting for centuries. Everyone stared at Blunder. "I didn't mean to," he wailed. "I swear, I only meant to fall quietly this time." Thor lifted Mjolnir, muttering, "Every time you try not to cause trouble, you cause more trouble." "That's progress," Loki pointed out. "At least the scale of trouble is improving." The prophecy scroll unrolled itself a little further with theatrical timing. When the clumsy one opens what was not ordered, the hall will learn courage in the wrong direction, which, translated into everyday speech, meant, hold on to your helmets. Down the staircase they went, Odin in front, because he insisted on pretending control. Thor stomping behind him, because thunder has no volume control. Sif steady as bread. Loki humming, as if this were all his plan. Ollie adjusting his spectacles. Blunder apologizing to each step he touched. Sivis whispering sorry to the air for existing at all. If just splitting into 3 versions of herself just to decide which foot to use first. And Fenrir bounding last, tail wagging so hard the lanterns flickered. At the bottom they found not a vault of treasures nor a dungeon of nightmares, but a library. Endless shelves stretched into shadows, filled not with books but with boxes. Each box was labeled with a single sentence. Things that never happened. A sword that never broke. A war that never ended. A kiss that never landed. The air was thick with possibilities, so heavy they bent the floor. Blunder, wide-eyed, whispered, "It's beautiful." His key glowed brighter in agreement, then zipped out his hand and unlocked a nearby box. Out spilled a rush of golden dust that swirled around him like applause. And suddenly Blunder was standing taller, his clumsy shoulders square, his voice stronger. I can do this," he said, surprising even himself. For one shining moment, he looked like the hero every saga promises but never delivers. Everyone blinked. Thor muttered, "Impossible." Sif raised her brows. Loki grinned like a proud parent at a science fair he hadn't attended. Then Blunder tried to step forward, tripped over nothing, and fell face first into another box. The dust vanished. The moment ended. The library sighed as if relieved balance had been restored. Fenrir howled with laughter, rolling on the floor, his key jingling like a bell. The prophecy scroll upstairs burned a new line into itself. The clumsy one was stumbling to Valor, and Valor would pretend not to notice. Meanwhile, Ifja was vibrating with possibilities. If he had stayed upright, he could have led armies. If he had opened that box instead, he might have invented peace. If he had sneezed, the dust might have created wings. Do you want me to show you all 23 versions? No! Shouted Odin, Thor, Sif, and even Ollie in unison. Ifja pouted. Fine, but you're missing some really interesting branches. She split into 2 extra versions of herself just to illustrate her point, then sulked back into one when Sif gave her the Annie look. Ollie crouched beside Blunder, who was still tangled in a box lid. Listen, the giant said gently. Even accidents can reveal strength. What matters is what you learn afterward. Blunder sniffled. I learned that walls are unforgiving. Good start, Ollie said. But the key wasn't finished. It zipped back into Blunder's hand, buzzing like it'd be on a mission, and pointed itself toward the far end of the library, where a massive door waited. This one had no locks, only carvings of wolves, serpents, and half-hidden crowns. Fenrir patted closer, eyes bright. That smells like destiny. Odin's jaw clenched, which means it stays shut. Loki, of course, clapped his hands, which means it absolutely opens. The key hummed in Blunder's palm, eager and insistent. And for the first time, Blunder didn't drop it. He held it steady, looking at the door as if maybe, just maybe, this time he wouldn't trip. The prophecy scroll upstairs fluttered, ready to write. The sky tear above Asgard widened a hair listening. And somewhere deep in the 9 worlds, Fate leaned forward in its chair, popcorn in hand. Because whether he liked it or not, Blunder was about to open something far larger than himself. And the saga, dear listener, had only just begun. The library of things that never happened was quiet in the way storms are quiet right before they knock politely on your roof and then blow it off anyway. Lanterns flickered, shelves leaned in, and every box hummed like it wanted to be open next. But all attention focused on the great door at the far end. Carved with wolves, serpents, and crowns, it waited like a stage waiting for its star. Blunder's key glowed so brightly his hand looked like it was lit from the inside. He was trembling, but he held on. For once he did not trip. Not yet. Fenrir patted forward, nose twitching, ears perked. He sniffed the carvings with the seriousness of a wolf, considering dinner options. Then he said, in a voice that made Odin visibly stiffen, "It smells like family." The hall froze. Not the library, not the shelves, not the lanterns. The gods. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir. Sif set her jaw. Ollie adjusted his spectacles, as if they were a shield. Odin glared so hard the air considered combusting out of politeness. Family? Odin growled. Fenrir's grin widened, sharp and unrepentant. Yes. Blood. Teeth memory. This door hides something that belongs to me. Or to us. His tail wagged, jingling the key tucked into his fur. It smells like the day father lied to me. Like the moment the chains bit. It smells like promises that were never honored. Loki cleared his throat and raised a finger. For the record, I've lied to a lot of people. Let's not be specific. Too late, Fenrir said, pressing his nose to the wood. The carving seemed to shift under his breath, wolf shape stretching wider, eyes glowing faintly. The door wanted to be acknowledged. Blunder squeaked. Maybe we don't open it? His key buzzed like an impatient bee, directly contradicting him. If it wants to open, it will. Loki said cheerfully. Better to be the ones holding the handle when it does. Sif snapped, or better to walk away. She turned to Odin. Say the word. End this nonsense. Seal it again. But Odin's eye was fixed on Fenrir. Not the door, not the key, not even Loki. Fenrir, He saw a prophecy coiled in the wolf's grin, in the casual thump of his tail, in the way the word family tasted on his tongue. Odin hated prophecy most when it looked like truth. Before he could decide what command to bark, Sivis spoke. "I think he's right," Sivis whispered. And that whisper, dear listener, was enough. Sivis' voice carried their gift. The unfinished sentence, the unbearable pause, the silence that pulls secrets out whether they want to leave or not. The library itself shuddered, boxes rattling, shelves sighing. The door moaned like an old wound. "Stop," Odin snapped. "I didn't mean to," Sivis said quickly, but the pause was already in motion. It reached into everyone, pulling truths out like thread from cloth. Thor thought of the fear he never named, losing not to giants, but to himself. Sif thought of how tired she was of ceilings falling every week. Ollie thought of the years in his locked room, waiting for someone to ask his name. Blunder thought of how much he wanted to matter. Ifja thought of how she secretly feared that none of her branches ever led to happiness. Loki thought of how often he pretended laughter was enough. And Odin thought of how much he feared his children, not just Loki's, but his own. The silence broke like glass. Everyone gasped, raw and bare. And the door laughed. Yes, the door laughed. A deep, creaking chuckle that shook dust from the rafters and sent every box in the library groaning with envy. Fenrir growled in response, ears flat, eyes wild. "That's mine," he snarled. "That laugh belongs to me." The prophecy scroll upstairs burst into flame around its edges, writing in smoke instead of ink. When the pause breaks the silence, the wolf will answer laughter with hunger, and the High One will run out of patience. Odin rose, cloak flaring, Gungnir in his hand. "Enough! I will not watch another prophecy unfold. I will not wait while locks sing and doors mock. I am done with patience." He hurled his spear at the great door. The point struck true, glowing with all the fury of the Allfather's will. For a heartbeat, it looked like victory. Then the door swallowed the spear. The wood rippled. The carving stretched, and Gungnir disappeared into its grain like water into dry earth. A low hum rolled through the hall, the sound of a lock turning somewhere deep inside. The lanterns flickered out. Fenrir threw back his head and laughed again, long and triumphant. "You see? Even your weapon knows whose story this is." Odin's face turned storm-dark. "Then we will tear the door from its frame." Thor raised his hammer. Sif raised her hands. Loki clapped in delight. Blunder nearly fainted. Sivis whispered another apology that made the shelves sag. Ifja split into 3 versions at once, shouting options so quickly no one could follow. Ollie the therapist sighed and said, "This will require more sessions." And the door, patient and amused, waited for its next key. The great door loomed at the far end of the library, carved with wolves, serpents, and crowns that shifted when you weren't looking. The wood was not merely wood. It had the sheen of old oak rubbed with oil and the memory of teeth. The iron bands were black as eclipse and warm as skin. When the lantern light moved, the carvings moved too. Fangs opening, coils uncoiling, crowns sliding from brow to brow as if to ask who would dare wear them next. You could almost smell them. Wolf musk, cold iron, the copper tang of victory. Odin's spear was gone, swallowed whole. Its absence left a kind of ringing in the air, as if a bell had been struck and never stopped vibrating. The Allfather's fingers twitched. Empty. His cloak sagged at one shoulder, as though even fabric grieved the missing weapon. Fenrir was still laughing like a wolf who had just discovered comedy clubs, the sound bouncing off the stone like a drumbeat of appetite. Every chuckle shook dust in the rafters and sent pages fluttering. His chains rattled in counterpoint, jingling like sleigh bells on a slaughter sledge. Blunder clutched his glowing key like a candle in a storm, the light flickering on his knuckles. His shoulders hunched, but his feet held their ground. The glow pulsed in uneven beats, as though the key itself were nervous about what was about to open. He glanced at everyone else, hoping for a cue, and found only God staring at a boy as if prophecy had thrown them a punchline they weren't ready for. And Thor decided it was time for subtlety, which, for Thor, meant hitting something very hard. He raised Mjolnir, the hammer humming in anticipation. "Stand back," he declared. "If spears won't work, force will." Lightning licked across the runes carved into the head. His feet spread, knees bent, shoulders rolling. Every inch the warrior who thought a blow was also an answer. Thor, Sif warned, this is a library. Thor frowned. So, libraries remember. Her voice carried weight, as if speaking to the shelves as much as to him. But Thunder has never been a fan of caution. Thor swung. Mjolnir struck the door with a crack, like the sky breaking its own back. Sparks flew. Dust rained. The floor trembled. For one glorious moment, Thor looked certain he had won. The carvings jolted as if in pain. The crowns tilted. The serpents recoiled. The wolves' jaws snapped shut. Then the library screamed. Not the people inside it. The shelves. They rattled, groaned, and shrieked in 1,000 voices. The voices of books unwritten and boxes unopened. Do not break us, the shelves wailed. Do not smash possibility. We are fragile. We are patient. We are waiting. Every drawer flew open. Catalog cards fountained upward like startled white moths. A globe spun so fast its oceans blurred, and then burst into spray of salt that glittered like tears. Thor staggered back, stunned. Mjolnir drooped in his hand, embarrassed to have offended so many metaphors at once. His beard bristled with dust. For the first time in an age, Thunder looked as if it had hit the wrong mountain. Blunder, panicking, rushed forward to help. He slipped on a fallen box lid, flailed wildly, and, of course, slammed straight into the door. His key jabbed against the carvings. The glow burst out like fireworks, threading between wolf teeth and crown spikes, filling the carved serpents with living light. Click! A new lock turned. Deep inside, something shifted with the sound of a throat swallowing. The wolves on the panel opened their eyes and blinked at Blunder. Everyone gasped. Blunder froze, cheeks red, keep buzzing like an overeager bee. I didn't mean to, he shouted. I was trying to stand upright. His voice cracked and echoed back at him from the shelves like 1,000 librarians sighing. Fenrir barked laughter, tail thumping the floor hard enough to rattle lanterns. Accidents count, he said. The door doesn't care how you open it, only that you do. His tongue lolled in joy at the chaos, and each panting breath fogged the cold iron like a child's on winter glass. The prophecy scroll upstairs, already half-burned, unfurled another glowing line in smoke. When thunder fails and clumsiness succeeds, the hall will remember that bravery stumbles too. The letters hung above them like constellations scrawled by an impatient hand. Ollie nodded sagely. Bravery often trips before it walks. He reached out and caught one of the floating cards, turning it over to find a single word, try, before it dissolved. Blunder looked up, wide-eyed. So, I'm brave. Accidentally, Loki said with a grin, which is the best kind. He twirled a shard of falling plaster between his fingers like a coin and flicked it into the shadows. It came back as a feather. Sivis, pale as parchment, whispered, if we keep opening it, something terrible will come out. The pause in their words made the air lean in, hungry for confession. Their key trembled, as if ready to slip from their grasp. Sif touched their shoulder, steady as ever, or something necessary. Sometimes those are the same. She lifted her chin, strands of hair sticking to her brow with sweat, and tightened the net of light over their heads. The library moaned again, shelves swaying like tall grass in storm. We feel you, the voices cried. We feel your truths, your lies, your fears. Do not forget we have feelings too. Dust motes spun in slow gyres, each one holding a syllable from some lost story. The smell of paper, ink, and ozone thickened until even Thor sneezed. Thor frowned deeply. Libraries should not have feelings. They always did, Sif said softly. You just never listened. She pressed her key against a cracked beam and it would stop splitting as if soothed. Fenrir pressed his nose against the door once more. It's almost ready, he murmured. Almost. His key jingled in his fur, eager, waiting. He drew in a long breath and closed his eyes, as though scenting a field he had run as a pup. Odin clenched his fists, fury burning in his single eye. We end this now, he declared. No more keys, no more locks, no more waiting. His voice rolled like distant surf under storm clouds. But the door only laughed, low and patient, like destiny enjoying the show. The laugh crept between shelves, curling up the ladders, caressing the rafters as if to thank them for falling. Its teeth glimmered in the grain of the wood. A small splinter popped from one hinge and dropped to the floor like a tick of a clock. And above, the tear in the sky widened another inch. Stars peered down, curious and unafraid. Ink bled upward from open books into the gap, like smoke returning to a fire. The ceiling beams groaned again, not breaking this time, but listening. The library's breath hitched, then steadied, waiting for someone to decide whether this would be a collapse or a confession. Blunder took one hesitant step backward and nearly tripped on a rolling globe. He steadied himself, then squared his shoulders. The key buzzed against his palm, a sound like a wasp in a hymn. He glanced at Fenrir's gleaming teeth, at Thor's hammer drooping like a disappointed teacher, at Sif's woven net glowing like dawn. His own breath slowed. "I didn't mean to," he murmured again, but softer now. Less excuse than admission. "But I'm here." Loki's grin tilted, some of the bravado slipping. "Accidentally brave," he said again, but more to himself. He reached out with one finger and drew a circle in the dust at his feet. It glowed for an instant and then faded. That's how doors like to be opened. Siv's paws stretched long enough to hold a heartbeat. Then two. "If it comes out," they whispered, "what if it isn't terrible? What if it's just true?" Sif didn't answer. She pressed more light into the net. Thor shifted his grip on Mjolnir. Odin's eye flicked to the prophecy line hanging in the smoke, and then to Blunder. Fenrir licked his lips. The door breathed in, a sound like a tide filling a cave, and the shelves whispered, each voice a different page number. Endings can change, but beginnings must be chosen. The tear above widened another inch, then held, quivering, as if waiting for a cue. Dust sparkled in the air, suspended between fall and flight. Even the wolves and serpents carved into the door seemed to pause, tongues flicking, ears pricked, waiting to see what the clumsy boy with the glowing key would do next. The door had swallowed Odin's spear, endured Thor's hammer, and hummed beneath Blunder's accidental bravery. It stood taller now, the carvings shifting with every breath. Wolves grinned wider, serpents coiled tighter, crowns tilted at dangerous angles. The library groaned all around, shelves muttering like gossiping neighbors. And that was when Ifja, daughter of Loki and the word If, decided to be helpful, which, in her case, meant splitting into 3 versions of herself, then 5, then 9, each one chirping a different possibility. "We could open the door carefully," suggested one. "Or recklessly," shouted another. "Or half open it and peek," offered a third. "Or bribe it with muffins," said a fourth. "Or never open it at all and just redecorate around it," squeaked the ninth, who had a flair for interior design. The library buzzed with options. Blunder looked dizzy, trying to follow. Thor rubbed his temples and used more than 2 choices at a time. Fenrir wagged his tail like a wolf at buffet. And Odin, poor Odin, clenched his jaw so hard the air began to creak. "Enough," he barked. "We will not drown in branches. We will hold to one path." But the prophecy scroll upstairs had already scribbled. When the daughter of it multiplies, branches will strangle crowns, and ceilings will remember gravity, which was awkward timing, because at that exact moment, the ceiling of the library groaned like an old tree and dropped a beam of dust. Everyone glanced up. Sif, calm as bread rising, lifted her key from her hair. It glowed warm, steady, golden. She held it aloft, and the ceiling froze mid-crack. The shelves sighed in relief. Her key sang, not like Blunder's frantic buzzing or Fenrir's smug jingling, but like a lullaby carried across fields at dusk. It spread through the hall, weaving itself into the rafters, steadying the floor, quieting the shelves. Even the great door seemed to pause, listening. Sif smiled faintly. This one was never meant for locks. It was meant for roofs. Thor stared at her in awe. "You can hold the ceiling." "I already do," she said simply. The prophecy scroll inked a new line, soft and admiring. When the golden-haired steadies the roof, the hall remembers why walls matter. But Odin, watching the ceiling strain despite Sif's key, muttered, "Even you cannot hold it forever." He looked up at the widening tear in the sky above Asgard, the one that had politely filed its resignation. The thought clawed at him like prophecy always did. Maybe the roof of the 9 worlds was never his to keep. Fenrir licked his teeth and said, "When the ceiling falls, no one will stop laughing." Loki clapped his hands. "What a show! My children are finally useful. Even the roof has joined the plot." "Silence!" Odin snapped. But silence was no longer his to command. It belonged to Sivist, who shifted nervously in the corner, their key humming with unbearable pauses. And when Sivist whispered, "I'm sorry," the entire hall stopped breathing again, waiting for what would spill out next. The door laughed, the ceiling cracked, and Odin realized, with the weight of inevitability pressing down like stone, that he could not hold it much longer. The library held its breath. If libraries could be said to breathe, which in this one they absolutely could. The ceiling groaned. Sif's key sang. Blunder's key buzzed. Fenrir's jingled, and Ibjam multiplied into a chorus of suggestions, none of which anyone wanted to hear. And in the middle of it all, Sivist clutched their own key as if it were a confession they hadn't meant to say out loud. "I don't think this is mine," Sivist whispered, their voice trembling. But the pause that followed was heavy enough to crack marble. Everyone froze, waiting for the truth that Sivist's power always dragged out into daylight. The shelves shuddered. Boxes popped open, spilling dusty phrases and broken possibilities into the air. One of them whispered, "The wolf was never supposed to be chained." Another sighed, "The crown was never meant to belong to one eye." A third muttered, "The trickster should have been king." Odin's face darkened like storm clouds, but Sivist's glowed brighter, humming with unbearable honesty. "I'm sorry," Sivist stammered. "I can't hold it in. The door, it isn't just a door. It's a memory. It's our memory. It's what Asgard refuses to admit." Fenrir's ears perked. He threw back his head and laughed, a deep, rolling laugh that rattled lanterns and shook dust from the rafters. "Ha! Did you hear? Even silence admits it. The chains, the lies, the crowns, it all stinks of family." His laughter echoed so loudly the tear in the sky above widened another inch. Polite no longer, but eager, Thor raised his hammer, ready to silence him with thunder. But Loki stepped forward, grinning ear to ear. Well, exactly as I planned." "No," Sif said flatly. "Yes," Loki insisted, spreading his arms dramatically. "You see, I knew the door would open. I knew the keys would choose. I knew Sivist would reveal the truth." "You didn't," Thor growled. "I did." Loki lied smoothly. "This is all going perfectly." Ollie, adjusting his spectacles, said, "Lying to yourself is still lying." But Loki ignored him, basking in the chaos as if it were applause. Fenrir's laughter shook the shelves. Blunder tripped over a box and accidentally caught it before it fell, looking heroic for half a second. Ip just split into 7 versions, each shouting a different way to use the truth now that it had been spoken. Sif held the ceiling steady, though sweat dotted her brow. And Odin stood in silence, his one eye burning with the fury of a king who knew prophecy was outpacing him. The prophecy scroll upstairs, tired of being subtle, burned its next line across the air itself. When silence unlocks what kings deny, the wolf will laugh too loud, and the trickster will claim the plan as his own. The words glowed like fire above their heads. The door pulsed, its carvings shifting into sharper teeth, longer coils, heavier crowns. It was opening itself, and no amount of denial could stop it now. And Loki, smiling far too widely, whispered, "Finally, a proper family reunion." The library groaned as the word family rolled through the stacks like a cart with a broken wheel. Drawers yanked themselves shut. Ladders skittered sideways. A child's primer fell open by Blunder's boot and showed, without being asked, a picture of a house with a red door and a child deciding who could come in. Sivist's fingers dug into the haft of their key until the knuckles blanched. "It remembers more than rooms," they said, barely breathing. "It remembers choices, not events, excuses, the times we said later to mercy, the hours we charged interest on love." Their voice thinned. "It remembers us being gods." Odin's jaw tightened. "We were stewards. We were editors." Loki corrected cheerfully. We cut messy chapters. You tore out people, Sif snapped, and pulled more golden threads across the sagging rafters. Her net of dawn light caught a hail of shingles and turned them to harmless confetti that smelled faintly of pine in schoolrooms. Ifja 1 clapped as if this were theater. Ifja 2 began tallying disasters on her fingers. Ifja 3 tugged Blunder's sleeve. The door listens to rules, she whispered. Not laws, house rules. What rules? Blunder asked, choking on dust and authority. Ifja 4 pointed at the primer. That one, the red door. We do not open for hunger. We open for hunger that says please. Ifja 5 bit her lip. We never wrote that rule in Asgard. Fenrir's lip curled. I asked for centuries. I begged and I bit, and I learned what begging buys. He shook his chains, and they jingled like the end of a song no one finished. Today I take. The door purred at a certainty. Its eye dilated. The grin's grain darkened. From its seam, hands crept. Not the raking kind this time, but the small, curious sort, the sort that fumble for a latch. They were memory hands, mimicries of every moment a god had opened something because he could. Sivis swallowed. I can slow them. They lifted the key and spoke a pause, not a block, but a breath. The hands hesitated. Fingertips hovering an inch from the latch, the way forgiveness hovers an inch from a mouth that can't yet shape it. The pause trembled. It wasn't meant to bear a family's history. Odin's gaze went distant. If it is our memory, we can amend the record. Loki wagged a finger. Aha, not by decree. The library hates revisions written from thrones. Ali cleared his throat. Annotations are allowed. Margin notes. Errata sheets. Corrections signed by those who erred. His spectacles flashed. It likes those. Silence fell so sudden the dust seemed to stop mid-mote. Thor lowered Mjolnir another inch and stared at Odin. Sif did not look away from the ceiling, but her mouth softened. Ifja 7, who had been drawing circles on the floor with her boot, looked up with a small, savage hope. Odin breathed out. It sounded like winter melting. Then right. He squared his shoulders in that old theater of kingship, the cloak, the height, the law that made itself tall when he did. Fell away like a costume loosened at last. He stopped, throat working. His eye turned to Fenrir, and something that was almost human. I loved my city more than my son, and called it order. The library shivered. 1,000 bindings loosened a millimeter in relief. A pressed flower between 2 pages turned brighter, as if light had always waited between apology and acceptance. Fenrir blinked. His ears twitched. The laugh he'd been winding up collapsed in his chest into something hoarse and dangerous. You say that now, he rasped. At the door. Yes, Odin said, because the door is where the truth belongs. Loki clutched his heart. Oh, that was almost pretty. Right, Ali prompted gently. Odin reached for a desk that trotted over on short legs. It flung a quill onto his palm with the relief of a friend finally asked to help. He bent, and his handwriting, once imperial, shook like a bridge in high wind. On a sheet that smelled faintly of smoke and mint, he penned in black, Erratum. We chained fear and called it peace. We crowned certainty and called it wisdom. We cut out the trickster and called it safety. We were wrong. The sheet flew up of its own accord and glued itself to the nearest atlas. The map's boundaries blurred, then redrew with softer lines. The hands at the latch shrank a fraction, as if embarrassed to be seen. Sif, breath ragged, added a line in gold. Addendum. Dawn is for everyone, even those who bid us. The net brightened and held, not with strain now, but with practice. Thor grunted, scowled, and snatched a quill. Note, he wrote in letters like rocks. Strength that does not protect is a tantrum. The floor steadied under Blunder's boots. Ifja, plural and unanimous, scribbled in 6 inks. Revision. We stopped rehearsing the fall. We rehearsed the catch. The ladders rolled into place along the higher stacks, as if in drill. Sivis did not write. They pressed their key to the page's edge and spoke a pause that became a thin white margin. Space for further remorse. It said without words. The library side, which in libraries is consent. Loki pirouetted toward the desk. plucked a quill, and drew a flourish that resolved, shockingly, into a sentence unadorned. Truth is the only trick that stays funny after the third telling. He grimaced as if the honesty had a splinter in it. The quill spat a dot of ink that landed on his cuff like a stain earned the honest way. The door's eye narrowed, irritated. Its grin cracked at one corner and showed raw grain beneath. The memory hands faltered again, and some went looking for pockets to hide in, like children who'd been told no and were deciding whether to try yes from a different angle. Blunder stared at the sheet, as if it were a thunderstorm he'd just walked through. His key hummed against his palm. "Does it change anything?" he asked, voice very small. "It changes us," Sif said. "The door keeps score." Fenrir's chain scraped the floor in a tight circle. He watched the errata flutter onto spines and seep into glue. He watched the eye withdraw hair. He watched Odin not stand taller, but stand truer. Hunger flickered. Rage steadied. "Your paperwork," he said, voice flat, "will not unstar the starved." "No," Odin said, "but it will stop us from calling your hunger treason and our hunger law." "Poetry," Fenrir sneered and yanked. A lynx screamed. His muscles bunched with the memory of running. The tear in the sky listened. Blunder stepped in front of the wolf without, later, being able to explain why his feet had done that. His key thrummed through his wrist like a second pulse. He looked not at Fenrir's teeth, but at the hollow behind his eyes where old Winters had kept house. "I can't fix what you needed," he said, throat shaking. "But I won't feed you what I needed either." Thor's head turned, slow and surprised. Sif's mouth lifted half a heartbeat. Loki made a soft, greedy sound, as if he'd found a coin in his own pocket he'd forgotten about. The door swelled, offended at being upstaged by a sentence in a boy's mouth. It pushed. The seam widened. The eye brightened. The grin remembered how to be a cliff. From its threshold, not hands now, but room spilled. Tableaus of memory. Set pieces dragged onto stage by a god who wanted to play again. A hall where a young wolf learned to wear iron by the hour. A council chamber where wisdom voted to hide affection. A quiet corner where a trickster brought a joke he'd built like a birdhouse, and no one laughed. The library keened, sick at the sight of itself. "We shelved these," it groaned. "We labeled them necessary." A whole stack toppled in shame. Siv's keys shook in their grip. "This is the part," they whispered, "where my power hurts." They stepped into the path of the memories and split the air with a pause so simple it almost wasn't one. A hell breath before saying "I'm sorry." The room slowed, frames juddering, as if the projector had remembered it could refuse to run. "Hold." Odin told him, not as king, but as adjunct. "Please." "Please," Sivist echoed, and the pause transformed, no longer confession extracted by force, but silence offered to let someone else speak. Into that silence, Ollie coughed gently. "If we are annotating, we should stamp." He fished in a drawer that scuttled to him like a crab. From it, he produced a rubber stamp that smelled of rain on pavement and overdue relief, amended. The stamp thudded onto the edge of every memory room. The letters glowed, then sank into the scenes like salt into soup. The halls iron-learned rust. The council benches remembered splinters. The joke found a laugh in the back row and smiled without forgiving. Fenrir flinched as the hall warped, just a little around the edges. He snarled at the feeling and lied to it. He told it had not happened. The lie stuck like a seed on his tongue. Loki watched him with an intimacy that was not kind. "Brother," he said softly, "you deserve better, and so did the rest of us. But if the door is memory, it eats the better we refuse to admit. So feed it your crown." Fenrir spat. Loki's grin showed every tooth. "Gladly. I was never good at hats." Sif rolled her eyes. "Stop flirting with apocalypse." The door, annoyed that its spectacle had not caused the weeping it ordered, changed tactics. It turned the memory rooms toward Blunder. They became his. The schoolyard where he dropped his tray and the laughter that lived in the cracks. The handshake he missed. The hour he told the truth too late. The face that forgave him before he knew he'd erred. The rooms leaned, their doors ajar, their carpets soft with welcome and traps. Blunder swayed. The key's heat climbed his arm again, but this time it did not sear. It steadied. He stepped to the threshold of the first room and looked. The air smelled like milk powder and new erasers. A poster on the wall said "Try again," and had always sounded like "Don't bother." His throat closed. Civis stood behind him, close enough that their breath made the fine hair near his ears shiver. "You don't have to go in," they said. "Then it'll come out," Blunder said hoarsely. "That's what doors do." He lifted the key and, instead of striking, tapped the door jamb once, twice, 3 times. The sound was ridiculous in the middle of everything else. A cheap knock, a child signal. The memory room opened wider, but the carpet didn't roll out. The poster unglued at one corner and drooped like a tired lid. The laughter, waiting in the floorboards, forgot its cue. "House rules," Idja hissed, suddenly crisp. Her 7 selves clicked into one smiling mind. "Say them." Blunder cleared his throat. The words arrived not as magic, but as manners. "We do not open for hunger," he said, voice gaining. "We open for hunger that says please." The room hesitated. A paper airplane that had been flying since he was 9 landed on his shoulder and stayed. Sif, holding the ceiling like Atlas with better hair, added, "We do not punish accidents by making them prophecies." Odin, eyes raw, said, "We do not call iron love." Thor boomed, "We do not mistake noise for courage." Civis whispered, "We do not bury silence where apology should be." Loki, with a flourish barely smaller than he wanted, concluded, "We do not pretend a joke is harmless if the room is bleeding." The library relaxed, a centimeter at a time, around those sentences. The stacks leaned inward to hear better. The air tasted less like old coins and more like rain. The memory rooms, confronted by house rules they could neither bully nor seduce, backed up a fraction, as if to take notes. The door seethed. The eye filmed and cleared. The grin adjusted. The carved crowns along its lintel cracked hairline cracks no hand had cut. "You think etiquette saves you?" It murmured from a hinge that had learned to sound like a throat. "You think courtesy undoes teeth?" "No," Blunder said, and was surprised to find he was not arguing. "But it changes who we are while we face them." Fenrir growled a low, letterless sound, then louder, as if he could drown out house rules with volume. He lunged because wolves do. Thor caught him because thunder does. Their collision blew dust off the rafters in a sudden summer of birds. Sif's net flexed and did not break. Odin did not raise a spear. He extended a hand and found Ollie stamping it, alone without ceremony. A mended came down on Fenrir's shoulder in a flash that left no burn and too much meaning. The wolf froze as memory ran across his skin like cold water. He shuddered. He slammed his eyes shut as if to snuff an image. He opened them, and the hunger was there, unchanged but less alone. It hated company. "Do not pity me," he snarled. "I won't," Odin said. "I will answer you." The door, sensing its moment slipping through fingers that were all fingers, played the only card it trusted. It tried to shut. Not on itself. On them, it lowered the ceiling it had torn, tilted the floor, narrowed the aisle between shelves until God's shoulders and wolf haunches knocked bindings loose. Civis lifted their key and set a pause in the narrowing, just enough for breathing room, just enough for one more choice. "Someone else has to speak," they said, shaking. "I can't carry all the truth." Ollie adjusted his spectacles. "A librarian never speaks first," he said, "but sometimes last." He stepped to the desk, found a blank catalog card, and, in tidy script that would outlast kingdoms, wrote, "Policy change, effective immediately." He looked at Odin, at Sif, at Thor, at Loki, at Civis, at Ifja, at Blunder, at Fenrir last of all. "Access to endings will require presence of beginnings," he read aloud. "No door opens to devour unless the room consents to be devoured. We reserve the right to refuse service to inevitabilities." The card leapt from his fingers and stapled itself to the lintel with a sound so ordinary it became holy. The door jerked, taken aback not by magic, but by procedure. The eye narrowed to consider the fine print. The grin tried to object on page 2, and discovered there were 3. Blunder laughed then, soft and unbelieving. Loki blinked as if someone had told his favorite lie back to him in a better suit. Sif finally let one bead of sweat fall and didn't apologize for it. Thor exhaled through his nose like a bull learning a new trick. Ifja clapped, then stopped, because clapping felt too small. Fenrir's head lowered. "You will starve me with rules," he said. "No," Sif answered. "We will stop feeding you with lies." "And we will feed you with answers," Odin added, and did not flinch when the wolf's gaze cut him to bone. The door settled, sullen. It did not close. It did not widen. It considered being bored and, failing, invented patience. The eye dimmed to a coin no one had quite pocketed. The grin learned the taste of splinters. The hinges hummed a low, resentful lullaby. Sivis sagged as if a weight had been removed that did not reduce but redistributed. They looked at their key, then at Blunder's, then at the desk where the errata lay drying. "It isn't mine," they said again, quieter, steadier. "It never was. It's ours." Blunder nodded, dazed and certain. "That's worse," he said, and smiled because he knew it was better. The library breathed out, long and relieved, the way a house breathes when a fight ends without a broken plate. A globe on a high shelf spun once, and stopped with North slightly askew, as if the world had tilted to make room for a small word. Loki brushed dust from his sleeves with extravagant care, and for once did not look at anyone while he spoke. "Family reunion, then," he said, tone almost gentle. "Bring your truths. Bring your taxes. Bring your jokes. We'll see which ones stand when the door gets bored." Odin's mouth twitched. Thor rolled his eyes. Sif did not hide her laugh. Ifja became one and stayed. Sivis pocketed their paws like a tool finally named. Fenrir's chains quieted. His chest rose and fell like a sea deciding whether to storm. He looked at the door, then at the boy, then at the paper on the atlas where erratum had dried black and undeniable. "I am still hungry," he said. "Then we will still answer," said Odin. "And I will still refuse," said Blunder. The ceiling creaked the kind of creak that means I can hold a little longer. The keys hum the kind of hum that means we can, too. The primer closed itself, its red door bright as a heartbeat. The library, thoroughly out of patience with apocalypse, rang its little bell again, not for alarm, for order. And the door, having been told no by house rules and yes by confession, learned something unbearable and survivable, that a room can remember its worst and still decide its next. It did not close. It did not open. It stayed. For now. The library of things that never happened was trembling now, every shelf rattling as if it knew a secret too big for its hinges. The great door at the far end pulsed with hungry light. Wolves in its carvings baring their teeth, serpents tightening around crowns that bent dangerously. And then, with the kind of creak that makes every spine in the room tighten, the door opened a crack. Just a crack, but a crack wide enough to let the impossible breathe. From the gap came a wind that smelled of endings and beginnings all at once. Not rot, not fire, not even ice, something stranger. It smelled like every story that could have been but wasn't. Every laugh never laughed. Every tear never shed. It smelled like choice denied. Blunder, poor Blunder, stood closest. His key hummed so violently it nearly slipped from his hand. The glow shot out like a beam straight into the crack, and the wind pushed back hard. Everyone braced themselves for Blunder to fall flat on his face again. And that, of course, is when he did something unbelievable. Instead of tripping, instead of fumbling, instead of apologizing, Blunder held his ground. His legs shook, his eyes squeezed shut, but he didn't move. He planted his feet, lifted the key high, and pushed back against the wind. The library gasped. Yes, libraries gasped. Don't argue. Shelves leaned forward. Boxes rattled in approval. Lanterns flickered like clapping hands. For one moment, Blunder was not clumsy, not useless, not an accident. For one moment, he was a hero. Thor blinked, hammer half raised. Did he just stand? He did, Sif whispered, awe in her voice. He stood. Fenrir tilted his head, grin fading just slightly. Interesting. Loki clapped as though he'd been directing the scene all along. Exactly as I intended. No, Sif said. Yes, Loki insisted. But while Blunder stood, the crack in the door widened another inch, and something pressed against it from the other side. Something vast, heavy, impatient. The door groaned, eager to swing wide. And above Asgard, the sky tore louder. The polite little resignation slip it had filed earlier was now an open letter flapping in the wind. Clouds spilled through the rip. Stars peeked out where they shouldn't, and the 9 worlds shivered as if they suddenly remembered how small they really were. Odin lifted his hand toward the heavens, pouring every ounce of his will into the tear. "Hold," he commanded. "Stay." His voice shook the rafters. The sky resisted. The tear yawned wider, the edges glowing with strained light. The prophecy scroll, charred and smug, carved its next line into the air. When the clumsy one stands, the sky will fall out of patience, and the high one will lose his grip. Fenrir laughed again, tail thumping so hard the lantern swung wildly. "Father can't hold the sky. He can't even hold me." Silence. Odin thundered, but his hand trembled. The rip spread another inch. Sivas whispered, "I'm sorry." And the room paused again, the silence so deep everyone heard their own heartbeat. But instead of collapsing under truth, Blunder used it. He leaned into the pause, letting it steady him, letting it carry his trembling into stillness. And for the first time, Blunder looked at Sivas with gratitude instead of panic. "Thank you," he whispered. Sivas blinked, shocked. No one had ever thanked them for their pause. Their key glowed brighter, humming in harmony with Blunder's. The door shuddered. The crack opened wider, and the thing behind it pressed harder, shadows stretching into the hall. Ali sighed, adjusting his spectacles. Therapy will need longer sessions. Loki grinned wider. No, this is perfect. My children are finally useful." Sif glared at him. "This is not useful. This is dangerous." "Same thing," Loki said cheerfully. The library groaned again, the shelves shaking. The door was opening, slowly but surely, and even Odin could not hold both sky and prophecy at once. And that, dear listener, is how Blunder stood tall for the first time. The sky began to slip through Odin's fingers, and the family drama of Asgard prepared to get much, much louder. The door at the far end of the library was no longer polite. Its crack had widened just enough for something vast to slip its breath into the room. The air turned colder, sharper, and heavy with whispers that had no mouths. They slithered between shelves, coiled around ankles, and curled into ears like secrets too shy to say themselves aloud. Blunder flinched, clutching his key tighter. Sivas pressed theirs to their chest, as if it might muffle the pauses trembling in their throat. If to split into 3 versions at once. One covering her ears, one trying to write down every whisper, and one excitedly shouting, "I think they're offering options." Thor swung Mjolnir at the shadows, but the hammer whiffed through smoke and echoed back with nothing to strike. "Cowards," he bellowed. "Come out where I can smash you." "Thor," Sif said, "you can't smash whispers." "Not with that attitude," Loki murmured, adjusting a smirk as if it were a collar. Fenrir, however, was thrilled. His ears twitched, his tail thumped, and his grin stretched wide enough to frighten courage itself. "They're calling," he said. "They're calling me. I hear them. My name, my hunger, my birthright." He padded closer to the door, nose pressed against the crack, and inhaled deeply. Then he laughed, low and wild. "I'm first." Odin stepped forward sharply, cloak snapping like a storm. "You will stay back." Fenrir's grin widened. "You couldn't stop me with chains. You won't stop me with words." The prophecy scroll, eager for drama, scrawled its next line in burning smoke above their heads. When the door whispers, the wolf will demand to be first, and the golden hair will learn she cannot hold the roof alone. At that exact moment, the ceiling groaned. Sif's key glowed hotter in her hand, threads of light weaving into the beams above. She clenched her jaw, shoulders tense, holding steady. But the tear in the sky widened further, and the ceiling of the 9 worlds strained as if every star were leaning on it at once. Sweat trickled down Sif's brow. She held firm, but her key trembled in warning. "I can't do this alone," she whispered. Thor turned instantly, his hammer dropping to his side. "Then I'll help." He pressed his hand to hers, and for a heartbeat the hammer hummed in rhythm with the key. The beam steadied, the shells sighed in relief. But Sif shook her head. "Not just you, not just me. It will take all of us." Blunder stepped forward, trembling, and raised his key. Civis did the same, their paws thick but determined. Even Ifja, well, 3 versions of Ifja, lifted their hands, each clutching a shimmering branch of possibility. Fenrir growled, conflicted, then pressed his paw to his chest, letting his own key jingle into the chorus. The glow spread to the library, weaving into the walls, the shelves, even the great door itself. For a moment, everything steadied. The rafters accepted the help like old shoulders learning to share a yoke. Ladders slid into brace positions without being asked. The catalog breathed out a thin ribbon of dust that came down like a benediction. But the whispers pressed harder through the crack, more insistent, more seductive. They hissed promises of freedom, of crowns, of laughter that broke chains. They used everyone's first language. You were right. They tasted like the first bite of a stolen apple. They learned your name and said it softly. Ifja, coaxed one voice into the version taking notes. You could be the one who writes how this ends. Ifja, hissed another into the version covering her ears. You never had to listen at all. Ifja, giggled a third into the excited one. Say yes to everything. That way nothing will hurt. Civis heard a different shape of soft. No more pauses required. Speak once, and all will stop for you forever. The offer hit like sugar and sat like lead. Their fingers tightened on the key until it would bit back. No, they told the hush, and their refusal became a thin white space on the air, a margin big enough for second thoughts to write themselves. Thor's whisper came with weight and warmth. Let them sing you of victory. They'll finally understand that force was the plan all along. He grimaced as a flattery brushed his knuckles. You don't get to rewrite me, he said, almost gently, and Mjolnir went quiet, the way a loyal hound does when it sees its master choose patience. Sif's whisper appealed to Burden. You are the only beam that matters. If you relax, everything falls. She almost believed it. Exhaustion likes compliments when they arrive as duty. She exhaled through her teeth. We're changing the rule, she said. We do not build ceilings out of one person. Odin's temptation came as jurisprudence. You were right to edit the world. You can edit this too, remove their lines, keep only yours. He looked at the torn sky and, for a dangerous heartbeat, considered it. Then he set his jaw and lowered his hand from a familiar gesture of decree. I will annotate, he said. I will not command. Loki's whisper was bright and cold. You already planned this. Say so, and the fear becomes applause. He smiled at his own reflex to preen, and put it down like a mask after long performance. I prefer laughter I didn't buy, he told the crack. And Fenrir. Fenrir got the rawest sweet. A chorus of doors opening onto fields with no fences, meat steaming, forest quiet hunters, a sky without the sound of chains. Come, first. His flank quivered with memory of running that had never lasted long enough. The key in his fur chimed, jealous of the offer. Don't sing to me, he growled, teeth bared. Show me. He pushed his nose deeper into the seam until splinters caught in his whiskers. The ceiling dropped a fraction. The shelves tilted to catch it and groaned. Sif hissed between her teeth and tightened the weave. Thor shouldered him beside her. Their hands overlapped and light braided with thunder in a sturdy and imperfect stitch. Blunder's key stuttered like a heart learning new rhythm and then leveled, steady as a held hand. Ifja's 3 cells lined up like a cord. Civis hammered a pause nail into a splitting beam with a word that sounded like weight. Together, Sif said, not as a banner but as a reminder. Together, Thor answered, not as a boast but as a promise. Blunder swallowed. Together, he echoed, and felt the floor hum in agreement. The door didn't like that word. The crack brightened. The eye behind it narrowed. Whispers sharpened from suggestion to specification. They became contracts folded small enough to fit in an ear. To the clumsy, one hissed to Blunder, we offer a path without embarrassment, keys that never slip, steps that never stumble. You will never be late again. Blunder's cheeks burned. His fingers remembered every dropped tray, every giggle that stuck to his name. The offer landed where offers are supposed to land, on the bruise. The key warmed his palm. He looked past the crack to the primer still open on a nearby shelf, its picture of a red door bright as breath. No, he said to the bruise and the contract both. I want the right to trip and still be invited. The whispers recoiled like snakes discovering a colder stone. To silence, another purred at Sivist. We offer authority. Speak once. The world will stop. No more aching pauses. No more apologies. Sivist thought of all the moments they had held open so others could change their minds, and all the times no one did. If I make the world stop for me, they said, who moves it for someone else? Their key glowed the color of blank paper, the kind that waits for new words instead of silencing old ones. To dawn, the door murmured as if, we offer relief. Put down the sky. Let someone else lift. Let the roof fall if it wants to. You have done enough. Sif wanted to weep at how tempting enough sounded. Enough is true, she said, voice rough. And still, we hold together or not at all. She released one thread of light and handed it to Thor. He took it solemnly, looped it around his wrist, and the ceiling steadied in a new way, distributed, not dumped. To Thunder, a whisper smirked at Thor, we offer applause without restraint. Thor rolled his shoulder and let the smirk pass through him like a draft. If applause arrives when nothing stands, I'll smash the clapping first, he said, which was as close to philosophy as he ever wanted to get. To law. A parchment-rough murmur slid at Odin. We offer peace. Quiet, empty a complaint. Peace that is the absence of people is a tomb, Odin replied, surprised at himself at how quickly it came. To mischief, velvet soft to Loki. We offer perfect timing. Loki almost laughed. Perfect timing is boring. I'll take honest surprise, he said lightly, and meant it more than he liked. To Wolf, the whispers sang, every note like meat torn clean. We offer first place. Fenrir breathed that music into his ribs. First is a meal, he said, eyes on the door, not a home. But his claws scraped the stone, betraying how much the meal still mattered. The ceiling dropped another thumb's width. Ladders groaned. A rain of old bookmarks fell like exhausted butterflies. Sif tightened her jaw. Now, she said through her teeth, sing with me. Sif's key thrummed one clear note. Thor answered in fifths, hammer humming until the sound filled the forearms. Sivist poured a rest into the bar, a deliberate silence that made the note brighter. If just three voices braided melody, counter-melody, and a line that was only breath. Blunder hummed off-key until his ear found them and, embarrassed, corrected itself without quitting. Even Fenrir's chains contributed, clinking in measured time instead of mockery. The library liked that. Stacks resonated hollow-warm. Drawers clicked in sympathetic rhythm. A globe spun north, paused, and nodded. The floorboards stopped flexing their grief and remembered their craft. Above, the tear in the sky trembled, then tightened the slightest hair. Again, Sif said, they sang the shape of hold. It wasn't pretty. It was sturdy. The ceiling lifted the breath of a sigh. The door whispered louder to compete, pushing stories to crack at speed. Packets of possibility that stuck to skin and thought. It shifted tactics, from offers to arguments. Blunder. It hissed, you keep refusing. Do you know how many better boys I could use? Step aside and let competence through. He flushed hot with shame, so Oda had wrinkles. He thought of Ollie's stamp, of Amended, of the errata glued to maps, of the policy card on the lintel. We reserve the right to refuse service to inevitabilities. He squared his shoulders. I'm an inevitability, too, he said softly. People like me happen, and we matter. He put the key to the floor and felt the home rune under his heel. Thor, the door needled. You break everything you touch. Not today, Thor answered and did not swing. Sif, it coaxed, you are worshipped only when you bleed. I will be worshipped when I rest, she said, and let three more threads pass others. Sivist, it teased, you use pause as a control. I use them to invite, Sivist said. And to survive? Odin, it goaded. You love the world more than the people in it. Odin's mouth pulled thin. Then let me love people louder, he said, and put his palm flat to the nearest shelf, so the wood could feel him choosing. Loki, it tempted. You could be king here. Loki laughed properly at last, bright and mean at the edges. I prefer being necessary. Fenrir, it promised. First. Fenrir's breath hitched. He closed his eyes. Say, please, he told the door, and when it didn't, he snarled and stepped back one pace. It wasn't mercy. It was stubbornness refined by pain. The prophecy scroll, overjoyed be relevant. Scribble a line in cinders across the air. When all sing, roofs learn balance. When first refuses first place. Hunger learns grammar. Terrible poet, Loki muttered, but he wiped at an eye anyway. The whispers, thwarted at the edges, pressed through the middle. The crack spread a finger width. The eye behind shone marble hard. The room's temperature dropped. Books tightened their bindings against frost. Sif staggered a half step. There caught her elbow without patronizing her with words. If this is memory, Odin said to no one and everyone, then amendment must continue. He nodded at Ollie, the librarian, who had been quietly rescuing cards from underfoot, looked up. His spectacles reflected a constellation you could only see indoors. We can minute this meeting, he said, as if this were merely administrative. He lifted a ledger the size of a small table. Speak your new rules plainly. Sif, we do not balance the sky alone. Thor, we do not swing first at things that cannot bruise. Sivist, we do not use silence to hide. Ivja, all three, together, we do not multiply panic. We multiply choices. Odin, we do not call fear order when it is merely ours. Loki, we do not pretend a trick is a truth, nor a truth a trick. Blunder, voice shaking and sure, we do not exclude clumsy hands from keys. Fenrir, after a long, ragged pause, we do not feed wolves lies and call it love. His ears flattened at his own sentence. He looked like someone who had surprised himself in public. Ollie wrote each line in tidy script. The ledger drank the ink and did not bleed. When he finished, the book shut itself with a gentle, inevitable thump. The sound traveled up the supports and across the rafters like a command the structure wanted to obey. The ceiling rose another breath. The door hissed. The grin carved along its lintel blister like varnish under a new sun. You make policies, it said, disappointed and amused. You think procedures can smother me? Not smother, Ollie said. Shelve. And the shelves, bless them, moved. Sections shifted with the grace of a long-practiced waltz. Histories slid left. Myths slotted down. Errors found their bin. Aisles aligned to point not at the door, but toward the reading desks. The whole room redistributed itself around intention rather than fear. The whispers lost pathways. Some curled into knots. Others dissolved into dust that fell like ash and smelled, weirdly, like rain on warm stone. The crack did not close, but its breath lost edge. The eyes light cooled from predatory to watchful. Sif sagged and the circle of hands around her tightened, not to trap her, but to carry. Thor took more of the weight without complaint. Sivist added 3 beats of rest to the measure. Ivja, now for, when had that happened, invented a counterhum that let people breathe between effort and pride. Blunder found the note again, and held it even when his voice wanted to wobble. Fenrir watched them, chest heaving, hunger unchanged but no longer the only thing inside him. When does it end? He asked the floor, the door, the boy. When we stop choosing, Blunder said. So I choose again. He faced the crack, lifted his key, and spoke with all the awkwardness that honesty wears. You may whisper. We will answer. You may open. We will amend. You may call first. We will come together. The door's laugh, when it returned, was lower and less certain. It didn't echo, it absorbed. You tire, it observed, not unkindly. All things do. Yes, Sif said, and we rest in turns. Yes, Thor said, and we fight in turns. Yes, Siva said, and we wait in turns. Yes, Ivja said, and we decide in turns. Odin inclined his head, and we change in turns. Loki glanced at Fenrir and, after a theatrical sigh, added, and we forgive in turns, except when we don't and we try again. He grimaced as if the sentence had splinters. Truth often does. Fenrir's chains did not fall. They shifted, fractionally, from bite to brace. He stared at the ledger and the policy and the primer's red door. "I am still hungry," he said, because some sentences deserve repeating. "We heard you," Sif answered. "We hear you now." The library breathed, the way houses do when the wind decides to be a friend. A dozen little bells rang from nowhere and everywhere, not alarm, attendance. On the children's shelf, the primer closed with a soft click and reopened to a page that showed a table with too many chairs and all of them pulled out. The ceiling settled into itself. The tear in the sky held thin, bright, not widening. Stars peered down like neighbors noticing a party and choosing not to complain. The floor's runes glowed warm rather than hot. The catalog's drawers slid shut with the satisfaction of tools used correctly. The door, patient and ancient, whispered louder, not to overpower, but to remain. It did not retreat. It did not pounce. Its breath stayed in the room like weather. The crack was a fact now, the way rivers are facts. You don't argue with them. You build bridges, you learn to swim, you teach children not to drink too quickly. "Again tomorrow," Loki said, almost cheerfully, and then frowned at himself for sounding responsible. "Again when it pushes," Thor corrected, after sharing a look with Sif that contained both gratitude and everything they'd still argue about later. "Again," Sivus agreed, and slid a pause into the ledger between policy and practice, so there would always be room to think before shouting. Again, if Jacorist, 3 of her already writing plans, 1 writing jokes, 1 putting down her quill to squeeze Blunder's shoulder. Blunder swallowed, suddenly and deeply tired, and nodded. "Again," he said, and the key cooled to a steady warmth against his palm. Odin looked at Fenrir. The wolf looked back. No chains moved. No crowns fell. No pronouncements were made. "Not first," Fenrir said at last, and I heard him to say it less than it had 5 minutes ago. "Not today." "Not alone," Odin answered. The doors I blinked once slow. The grin splinters flaked, exposing raw grain that would, given time, take stain again. It whispered one last promise down the aisle. "I will be here." "So will we," Sif said. "So will I," said Blunder. "And me." Loki sighed, already drafting 3 jokes he might tell and 2 truths he might risk. Thor thumped Mjolnir to the floor, not as threat, but as punctuation. Ollie stamped a ledger, received, and the sound was small and official and perfect. The whispers settled into corners, grumbling like cats denied cupboards. The ceiling ceased its complaint and took up a hum. The shelves, smug in a bookish way, straightened their spines. The library, which absolutely could breathe, drew in a long, satisfied breath. It smelled like ink and pine in the moment after a storm when the world has been scrubbed but not simplified. And the door, patient and ancient, whispered louder, because that is what doors do when watched by people who have learned how to watch back. It could wait. It had always waited. It would always wait. The crack in the great door widened with the slow, inevitable confidence of something that had been waiting too long to be polite. The whispers inside turned into currents of sound, slipping through the gap like water through stone. They no longer spoke words. They spoke promises. Crowns glittered in the corner of every eye. Chains rattled, then fell silent, as if offering freedom on a discount. And always, beneath it all, laughter. Laughter that echoed Fenrir's own, deeper, older, as if the wolf had only been rehearsing for the real thing. Ifja, unable to resist, multiplied into 7 versions of herself at once. One wrote furiously on parchment, listing every possible outcome. Another shouted options like an auctioneer. A third sobbed because half of the futures ended in fire. A fourth cheered because the other half ended in cake. By the time she reached the 7th, she forgot which future she was counting and spun in a dizzy circle, gasping. Too many. There are too many branches. Civvis clutched their key tighter, their paws spreading to the hall, slowing everything just enough to catch breath. Thor raised Mjolnir, uncertain whether smashing the door would close it or only make it laugh harder. Sif braced the ceiling again, her key glowing hot as iron in a forge. And Blunder, sweet, clumsy Blunder, stood too close. He always did. The wind pouring from the crack caught him full in the chest. His key buzzed like a frantic hornet. He stumbled forward, tripping, arms flailing, straight into the very center of the door's glow. For an instant, the library froze, horrified. Then the light wrapped around him like a cloak. Blunder stood in the crack, not falling, not fumbling, standing. The light poured through his key, through his trembling hands, and filled the room. The shelves stopped rattling. The boxes hushed. Even the whispers paused to listen. Ollie the giant adjusted his spectacles, staring. Accidental courage again, he murmured. Remarkable. Fenrir snarled, pacing. He doesn't belong there. That's my place. His teeth glinted, his key jingled, his laughter turned sharp. Step aside, little accident, before I take what's mine. But Blunder didn't move. His knees shook, his eyes wide with terror, but he whispered, "Not yet," and the light from the door flickered in agreement, as if the universe itself had decided to let him try. Odin stepped forward, his single eye blazing. "This ends now. Step back, boy, before prophecy swallows us all." Loki, of course, leaned against the shelf with a grin that was far too wide for the moment. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. This is exactly as I planned." "No, it isn't," Sif snapped. "Yes, it is," Loki insisted, loudly enough to drown out the silence Sivas had just managed to create. And then the prophecy scroll, tired of being ignored, burned its next line across the ceiling beams. When futures multiply and the clumsy one takes the center, the wolf will hunger, the roof will strain, and the king will lose his grip entirely. As if on cue, the tear in the sky stretched wider, stars tumbling through like coins spilling from a broken purse. The ceiling shuddered above Sif's head. Her key flared, but her arms trembled. "I can't hold it alone much longer," she gasped. And Blunder, still glowing in the door's crack, whispered back, "Then I'll hold it with you." The light around him surged, spilling across the hall, weaving into the beams, into the shelves, into every trembling corner of the library. For a heartbeat, it looked like hope. For a heartbeat, because the door was still opening, and whatever waited behind it was still laughing. The door had opened enough now to reveal more than whispers. In the crack, where shadows pressed like impatient guests, an eye appeared. Not human, not wolf, not even God. Bigger than Fenrir's whole head, glowing like moonlight that had forgotten how to be gentle. It blinked once, slow and deliberate, and the library went silent as stone. Every shelf held its breath. Every lantern dimmed. Even Loki stopped smiling, though only for half a heartbeat, because he hated admitting surprise. Fenrir's ears pricked, tail stiff. His grin returned, savage and triumphant. "That's mine," he said. "That's my blood, my inheritance. You hear it, don't you? The laughter, the hunger, the promise. It was always meant for me." "No!" Odin barked, stepping forward. His cloak whipped like storm clouds, Gungnir missing, but his fury sharp enough to pierce anything. "It is a threat, and it will be sealed again." But the eye in the crack fixed itself on Odin, and the whisper that followed was louder than thunder. "You cannot seal what you birthed." The shelves trembled. Ifja multiplied into 4 versions, each arguing whether that meant Odin literally birthed it, or symbolically, or accidentally, or all 3 at once. Sif ignored them, arms straining to keep the ceiling from collapsing entirely. Her key glowed hot, threads of golden light stretching into the rafters like desperate stitches. Sivas clutched their key tighter, a pause falling heavy as stone. "He did," they whispered at last. "It's true. Odin made this." The pause yanked the truth into the open like a wound. Loki tilted his head, eyes bright with mischief. "Oh, fascinating. Do tell us more about the mistakes of kings." Odin snarled, his eye blazing. "Enough." He lifted his hand, channeling every ounce of his will into the crack. Light flared, raw and searing, as if he intended to blind the very thing staring at him. The eye blinked again, unimpressed. The door laughed, deep and resonant, shaking the beams, and the prophecy scroll, delighted, burned its next line into the air above them. When the eye opens and the wolf claims his inheritance, the High One will break what even he cannot mend. At that exact moment, Odin snapped. With a roar, he drove his power not into the door, not into crack, but into the library itself. The shelves buckled, the rafters cracked, The lanterns burst. Books that had never been written screamed as they burned. The floor split down the center. The ceiling above gave way with a sound like the world's spine breaking. Stars poured in, along with shards of sky, the 9 worlds groaning in protest. Sif screamed as her key flared too bright, too hot, searing her hand as it tried to hold the unholdable. Thor rushed to her side, hammer useless against gravity itself. Blunder stumbled in the glow, trying to stand firm, but the light wavered. Siv's paws collapsed into chaos. Ifja's branches tangled into knots. Fenrir threw back his head and howled, the sound shaking the last intact shells. And Odin, for the first time, realized his fury had done what prophecy always promised. It had broken something even he could not fix. The eye in the door blinked once more, and it laughed. The ceiling had been groaning for hours, or maybe minutes, or maybe since the beginning of time. It was hard to tell in a library that kept track of things that never happened. Beams creaked like old bones shifting in their sleep. Dust drifted down in lazy filaments. Each mote a memory of something unread. The shelves murmured warnings no one had time to hear. But now, at last, the roof gave up, with a crack like a world snapping in half. The beams splintered, the rafters caved, and the whole roof collapsed in a storm of dust, stars, and pieces of sky. Everyone shouted at once. Thor swung Mjolnir in wild arcs, smashing falling beams to splinters before they crushed his friends. Every swing thundered, the shock waves rattling ladders off their rails and scattering index cards like startled birds. His breath steamed, his muscles bunched, his eyes burned with the steady fury of someone who had seen too many ceilings fall. Sparks from his hammer ignited shreds of ancient parchment and burned them into constellations that lasted only a heartbeat before vanishing into smoke. Sif raised her glowing key high, the golden threads of its light straining to catch fragments of the roof like a net. Dust settled on her shoulders in gray drifts, but she did not bow. The light spun between her fingers, weaving itself into a trembling lattice, each strand an oath to hold just a little longer. The strain pulled lines at the corners of her mouth. Her teeth showed in a snarl, not of anger, but of effort. Ifja multiplied into 5 versions, 2 screaming, 2 planning, and 1 just standing still in awe. 1 clawed at the air as if to push the sky back up. Another scribbled symbols on the floor with her finger, hoping a diagram might save them. The 3rd, hands over ears, mouthed prayers she did not believe. The 4th tried to coordinate the others, and only succeeded in confusing herself. And the 5th watched with wide eyes, tears cutting clean tracks down dusted cheeks, murmuring, "It's beautiful," even as the ceiling fell. Sivis whispered an apology so heavy the falling debris hesitated for half a second before crashing down anyway. Her apologies had weight. They always had. She tasted the word sorry like iron in her mouth, shaped it into a pause wide enough for a beam to miss Thor's shoulder by an inch. She held that pause until her lips bled, then let it go with a gasp, and the next beam fell like a guillotine in slow motion. And Blunder, yes, Blunder, the same boy who tripped on flat ground, stood in the middle of the storm. His key blazed, the light anchoring him to the floor, as if the crack in the door had decided it wanted him more than gravity did. The glow pulled at his feet, like molten stubbornness, holding the board steady even as the rafters buckled above. Beams crashed around him, dust swirled, stars spilled, and Blunder did not fall. His knees shook, his eyes streamed, but he held. His fingers clenched the keys so tight that light leaped between them like water through a cracked jar. The library gasped. Again, because libraries love a dramatic moment. The shelves trembled as if suppressing applause. A dictionary hurled itself shut with a thud of punctuation. Somewhere, in a corner no one could see, a little bell rang without being touched. Fenrir laughed, tail wagging in the chaos. Look at him. The little accident stands while the sky itself falls. Maybe I should bite him last. His voice rolled through the hall like a drumbeat of hunger. His claws scratched runes into floor with every step, leaving grooves that smoked. His chains rattled, slackening just enough to promise they would soon be gone. Odin, his face storm dark, tried to summon his power to hold the ruin steady, but his hand shook. He stretched his palm toward the beams and felt only the echo of strength, like a king reaching for a crown already stolen. His fury had broken the balance. and even he could not command the wreckage back into place. He closed his fists around air and tasted defeat as dry as dust. And Loki finally, after all his smug pretending, laughed for real, not the sharp, mocking laugh of a trickster performing, not the sly chuckle of a liar covering his tracks. A deep, belly-shaking laugh, joyous and terrible. "Oh, this is magnificent," he cried, dust in his hair, stars in his grin. "I admit it. I'm having fun." His shoulders shook. Tears sprang to his eyes, not of sorrow, but sheer astonishment at a story outgrowing its author. Sif groaned. "That is not reassuring." "Of course it is." Loki shouted over the falling rubble. "Fun means opportunity, and opportunity means chaos, and chaos means, well, me?" He spread his arms wide, as if to catch the ceiling with a gesture of ownership. Dust clung to his sleeves like applause. The prophecy scroll, barely intact, scrawled furiously across its burning edges. When the ceiling collapses and the clumsy one refuses to fall, the trickster will laugh in truth, and prophecy will drink the dust of stars. The words glowed like embers, each letter drifting up and away, seeking a page that no longer existed. The eye behind the door widened, its glow spilling further into the hall. Whispers surged louder, tasting the ruin, savoring it. They hissed like eager scholars at a fresh scandal, their syllables forming shapes just shy of meaning. Fenrir pressed closer to the crack, fur bristling, eyes gleaming. "Open," he growled. "Open to me. I am ready." His breath came out in gusts that smelled of winter and grave earth. The chains on his legs trembled, like applause waiting for the cue. Blunder, still standing, shouted back, not at Fenrir, not at Odin, not even at Loki, at the door itself. "Not yet." His voice cracked like a boy's, but the light in his key roared in agreement. The glow shot upward like a flare, brushing the torn edges of the ceiling, tracing a new constellation across the spilled stars. The door shuddered, confused, as if no one had ever dared to tell it no. Its hinges twitched. The grin carved into it would twitch with it. For the first time, the thing behind the crack blinked in surprise. A soundless beat passed, a pause so delicate Sivist almost smiled at it. Dust hung in the air like question marks. The shelves straightened themselves as if caught gossiping. Thor lowered Mjolnir an inch, breathing hard. Sif's key dimmed, then steadied. Ifja's 5 cells drew closer together, forming a half-circle of hands that didn't know whether to hold or to push. Odin's eye narrowed, sensing the shift but not yet trusting it. Fenrir's tail flicked once, twice, like a metronome to his hunger. Blunder's grip tightened. The key's heat climbed his arm, burning away the last tremor of doubt. He spoke again, quieter but clearer. "Not yet. Not you. Not me." The door's eye blinked once more. Its glow receded a fraction. The grin softened, not friendly, but uncertain, the way a predator looks at prey that doesn't run. Loki's laughter dwindled into a chuckle, then into a slow exhale. "Oh," he said, voice softer than anyone had heard from him all day. "Now that is interesting." Sivist tilted her head. Did he?" "No," Odin murmured, "but something just changed." He straightened, dust sliding off his shoulders like discarded gilt. "Hold the line. The boy's refusal is a hinge." Thor nodded once, jaw set. "Then we don't let swing the wrong way." Sif's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile. "For once," she said, "we follow the clumsy one." Ifja's 5 cells laughed. One delighted, one disbelieving, one nervous, one wild, one relieved. And for a moment all 5 sounded like a single person who had just remembered hope. Fenrir bared his teeth, but the gleam in his eyes was not entirely hunger. "You think a blink stops me?" he growled. "You think a boy's little word can hold me?" He yanked at his chains. They groaned but did not break. Blunder lifted his chin. His knees still shook. His throat still tasted of dust. But he met the wolf's gaze anyway. "Try," he said. "I'm still here." And above them, where the ceiling had been, the spilled stars rearranged themselves, as if writing a sentence none of them could yet read. The great door, which until now behaved like destiny carved in oak, did something unthinkable. It hesitated. The crack pulsed. The eye blinked. The whispers faltered. For the first time since it began opening, it seemed uncertain. like a predator pausing because its prey had the audacity to bare its teeth. And what prey had dared? Blunder. Yes, Blunder, who had shouted "not yet" with a voice that cracked like a broken lute string. His knees trembled. His face was streaked with dust and tears, but the light in his key held steady. Against the ruin of the ceiling, against a storm of whispers, against prophecy itself, Blunder was standing. The library gasped again, of course. At this point, it was practically hyperventilating. Fenrir's grin vanished. His ears flattened, his tail lashed. "Enough," he growled. "The door calls for me, not for him." His chains jingled as he stalked forward, eyes burning with hunger. "Move aside, little accident, or I'll teach you what jaws are for." Thor stepped forward instantly, hammer raised. "You will not touch him." But Blunder, in the strangest act of bravery yet, lifted a hand to stop Thor. "No," he whispered. "If he wants me, let him try." "Odin's," I blazed. "Fool! You cannot withstand him." Blunder's voice shook, but his words were steady. "Heroes don't get to rest." The prophecy scroll, now little more than ash clinging to its own ambition, burned another line into the air. When the door hesitates and a wolf snaps, the clumsy one will learn that standing means never sitting again. Fenrir lunged. His teeth flashed, his claws scraped sparks from the floor. The library wailed as shelves toppled and boxes split. Dust swirled, lanterns shattered, stars fell through the broken ceiling. Blunder raised his key. The glow flared so brightly it blinded everyone for a heartbeat. Fenrir slammed into the light, jaws wide, but the key's power held like a wall of iron wrapped in fire. The impact shook the room, cracked the floor, rattled every shelf, but Blunder didn't fall. Sif gasped, holding her bleeding hand where the ceiling strain had scorched her palm. Sivis whispered an apology that made time itself hiccup. Ifjim multiplied into 6 frantic versions, all arguing about the best way to survive. Ali sighed and muttered something about progress through trauma. And Loki? Loki laughed, not because it was funny, though he claimed it was, but because nothing delighted him more than seeing the wrong person become the right hero at the worst possible time. "Yes," he shouted. "Stand, little accident. Show them the punchline no one expected." Fenrir snarled, pressing harder, teeth grinding against the light. "You can't hold me forever." Blunder's arms shook. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he whispered through clenched teeth, "Maybe not forever, just long enough." The door shuddered, caught between wolf and boy, crown and exile, destiny and accident. Its eye blinked again, uncertain, as if it wasn't sure which side it wanted to choose. And in that hesitation, the entire library realized one impossible truth. Prophecy wasn't written in stone. It was written in moments like this, when someone no one believed in stood against someone everyone feared. The library had become a battlefield of breath and hesitation. Blunder's key blazed. Fenrir's jaws pressed against its light, and the crack in the great door widened just enough for the eye behind it to watch with interest. Not fury, not hunger. Interest, like a gambler who had just discovered a new player at the table. Odin's one eye burned stormdark as he took in the scene. His hand trembled, not from weakness but from choice. For all his years, for all his titles, Odin hated choice most of all. Prophecy was supposed to make decisions for him. Fate was supposed to narrow the path. But here, now, in this collapsing library with stars falling through its broken roof, Odin realized he had to decide, act or lose everything. Thor looked to him, waiting. Sif strained under the roof's weight, bleeding but unbroken. Sivis clutched their key, terrified of the silence it carried. Ifja fractured into so many versions she couldn't count them anymore. And Blunder, dear Blunder, stood trembling but steady, holding Fenrir back by accident and willpower alone. And Odin? Odin laughed once, bitter and low. "I am the All-Father," he muttered, "and yet the choice is his." Fenrir snarled, pressing harder, his chains jingling like mockery. "Not for long. I will take what's mine. Step aside, little mistake." Blunder whispered back, "No." The prophecy scroll, charred and barely legible, sparked its next line into the dust-filled air. When a high one chooses and the branches break, the door will laugh and the game will change. And so Odin chose. With a roar that shook the beams, he hurled his power not at Fenrir, not at Blunder, but at the door itself. Light exploded across the crack, searing, burning, trying to force it shut. The eye behind it narrowed, then widened, and then the door laughed. Oh, yes, the door laughed. Not a creak, not a whisper, not the sly chuckle from before. A full, booming, belly-deep laugh that knocked books from shelves and dust from rafters. It laughed like thunder telling a joke only eternity understood. The shelves wailed. The boxes burst. The ceiling tore wider. And Ifja, poor Ifja, split into so many futures that they tangled into knots and collapsed all at once. She fell to her knees, gasping, "Too many! Too many! I can't hold them any more." The branches withered, leaving her only one version, shaking and pale. Fenrir pulled back from the light, startled. For the first time, his grin faltered. "It's laughing at me," he growled. "No," Loki said softly, and for once without a smile. "It's laughing at all of us." The eye in the crack glowed brighter, gleaming with delight. The door groaned wider. And everyone, from Odin to Blunder, from Thor to Sivist, from Fenrir to Loki himself, realized the same terrible truth. The door wasn't being opened. The door was opening itself. The door had stopped pretending. It no longer waited for keys or accidents or even prophecy. With a groan like mountains waking, the great slabs of oak and iron shifted on their hinges. Dust cascaded. The eye behind the crack gleamed brighter. And the door, in case anyone missed the point, opened itself. The library shrieked in outrage. Shelves toppled, boxes burst. Scrolls that had never been written tore themselves apart in protest. "We are not ready," the shelves wailed. This was not scheduled. A rain of index cards came down like white moths in panic. The floorboards, old, stubborn, buckled and then locked, as if a rib cage bracing for impact. But the door didn't care. It laughed, deep and rolling, the kind of laugh that made even Odin look small. The laugh crawled into the corners, under the tables, into the cracks of the catalog where children's fingerprints still lived in smudged graphite. It rolled the dust like surf and turned the ceiling's tear into a pupil. Fenrir's fur bristled, his grin feral, his nose twitching. He inhaled so sharply it rattled the beams. "Freedom," he whispered. His chains jingled like applause. His eyes gleamed brighter than the eye inside the door. "It smells like freedom." Thor stepped forward, hammer raised, but Fenrir growled without even looking at him. "Try, Thunderer. Swing your hammer. You will not stop me this time." Sif struggled under the weight of the collapsing roof, her key blazing but faltering. She braced one shoulder under a crossbeam, gold hair turned gray with dust, and still managed to angle her key so it drew a thin, perfect horizon line of light across the floor between the wolves and the boy. Sivist whispered an apology that made Dust hesitate midair before falling again. Her pauses had always been courtesies, never prisons, and now the air itself tried to be polite to the end of the world. Ifja clutched her head, still dizzy from too many futures collapsing at once. 5 almost stitches flickered around her like echoes deciding whether to be real. And Blunder. Well, Blunder still stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. The light from his key flared, marking him like a beacon, the eye inside the door fixed on him. Not Fenrir, not Odin, not even Loki. Blunder. He froze. Why is it looking at me? Fenrir snarled, turning on him. "Because you stole my place. That glow, it should be mine." His teeth bared, hunger dripping from every word. "If the door calls for you, then you're the first I devour." Blunder stumbled back, terrified, his key buzzing like a trapped hornet. "I didn't mean to. I was just standing here." "That," Loki said with a grin that was far too wide for the moment, "is precisely why it chose you. Nothing is more dangerous than an accident in the right place." The prophecy scroll, nearly ash, coughed out one last glowing line into the air. When the door opens itself and the wolf smells freedom, the clumsy one will become the first target. Odin raised his hand, fury storming in his eye. "Then we shield him. Whatever else prophecy demands, the boy will not fall." Fenrir laughed, long and wild. "Try, father. Try to shield him. You couldn't shield me. And with that, he lunged, not at the door, not at Odin, but straight at Blunder. Thor moved on instinct, a thunderhead in human shape. Mjolnir left his palm and met Fenrir mid-arc, with a sound like iron learning a new verb. The hammer did not knock the wolf back. It tilted his hunger, turning the lunge into a spiral that carved a crater through a forest of toppled shelves. Shatter would burst upward, pages hurled like flocking birds. Fenrir hit the floor, rolled, and rose, already laughing, already bleeding, already healed. Sif slid low and sure, interposed her key between fangs and boy. The golden edge sizzled where saliva met light. "Back!" she commanded, not to the wolf, but to the fear skulking in Blunder's knees. The fear obeyed half an inch. Sivis snapped the paws into the air. Time hiccuped. Fenrir's next stride lost a fraction of its cruelty. Ifta's flicker solidified. One If just shoved Blunder hard enough to bruise a rib. Another pulled Sif's elbow into a better line. A third yelled left, at Thor, who never needed advice and followed it anyway. The door widened its smile. More hands spilled through, longer, bonier, jointed wrong. They crawled not for bodies, but for words. Names on book plates, dates on spines, dedications that said for you when you are brave. Where a hand touched ink. Letters ran like mascara and cried themselves unread. "Stop the hands." Sif shouted. "No." Loki said, eyes narrowed, grin gone. "Let me?" He flicked 2 fingers. The hands reached for him and found only his shadow, which behaved like tar and elegance. "You like stealing meaning?" he asked them lightly. "Here, have mine." 1,000 possible lies swarmed the tide's fingers and clung. The hands slowed, drunk on options, too full to grab anything real. Fenrir feinted right, leapt left, and came up inches from Blunder's throat. Thor's hammer broke a table that had seen 7 monarchs quarrel and survive. The far half of the table whirled up and slammed Fenrir across the snout with the dignity of old oak refusing to be a mere splinter. The wolf shook the sting off and smiled with too many teeth. Odin did something he hated. He called for help he could not command. "Library," he said, and bowed. The shelves rustled like a forest answering rain. Ladders rolled of their own accord. A mobile of planets hung above the children's section, swung down and clocked a reaching hand with Saturn's ring. A globe broke at the seam, continents springing open like a box of knives, and every blade was a border nobody could cross without a story. "Boy!" Odin barked, suddenly informal and urgent. "Stand your ground." Blunder tried. His feet argued. The floor chose for him. The catalog numbers under his boots slid into home. An old rune carved by a librarian no one remembered sat exactly between him and Fenrir. The rune pulsed like a heartbeat. "Home," Blunder whispered, as though tasting a word he had forgotten belonged to him. The keys buzz steadied. It warmed past pain into purpose. Fenrir pounced. Sif met him head-on. The golden key was not a blade. Not exactly. But when it struck the wolf's muzzle, light sheared fur like a clean winter wind. Blood beaded, bright as berries. Fenrir laughed anyway, mouth opening to close on Blunder's shoulder, and met a pause so dense it behaved like glass. Siv's hand hovered, fingers splayed, catching a moment by its corners. It trembled under the weight. Pauses weren't meant for this much fury. "Now!" If Jawan cried. "Now!" If Jatu echoed. "Now!" Blunder said and drove his key down. The jagged light kissed the home rune and bit deeper. The floor answered, a low, old hum, more felt than heard. The hum did not push Fenrir back. It pulled the room toward itself, centering everything around the boy like a compass waking. Hands lost footing. Shelves leaned like trees in shared wind. The door's grin tilted, annoyed at being anything except the axis. The wolf pushed through the pause with snarl that stripped the word to its bones. He twisted, knocked Sif to one knee, and raked claws across Blunder's chest. The key took the worst of it, sparks founaining. Pain hit like a thrown brick. Blunder saw white and then saw more. He saw the village square. He saw a face he loved looking away. He saw himself dropping a tray, a torch, a promise. He saw the exact moment the name Blunder stuck, and the world laughed, and he learned to talk smaller than his lungs. "Don't." He heard himself say, Not to Fenrir, not to the door, but to the memory. Don't you dare. The key answered. It wasn't a sword and it wasn't a shield. It was a refusal with edges. He angled it under the wolf's chin, not cutting, lifting. Fenrir's head jerked. For an instant their eyes met. One a frostbitten night, the other a stubborn match. You don't eat accidents, Blunder said, voice low and shaking and true. You eat permissions, and mine's revoked. Fenrir barked laughter, so bright it broke a stained glass window no one had noticed was still whole. You revoke nothing, he said and bit. Thor hit him like an argument ending. Mjolnir did not crack bone. It hammered certainty. Fenrir reeled, teeth snapping on air where Boy had been. Sif dragged Blunder sideways by the collar, her grip strong as a mother breaking a fever. Up, she ordered. Your legs are invited. He stood. The room didn't steady. It respected him anyway. The door, offended at being treated as background, decided on spectacle. The eye widened until the torn ceiling was iris and cold star was pupil. The laugh returned, softer now, confident as a card sharp cutting a deck. He marked himself. From its threshold, new hands came, smaller, more numerous, children sizes, and they didn't reach to take. They reached to be led astray. Ipja gasped. It's lying is kindness. Loki's grin went knife-thin. Of course it is. Sivist's voice gentled. Don't let the pauses become excuses, she said to Blunder and to herself. She released a moment she'd been holding before it cut her palms. Odin stepped forward into the new tide and bared his empty hands. Not command, he told the door. Not decree. Det. He spoke the word again, old as winter, and it slicked the floor like oil for all who wanted to rush. The children hands slid, lost grip, skittered back toward the threshold as if embarrassed by what they had almost done. Father, Fenrir snarled, shaking blood and debt from his fur, your payments will buy you nothing. They will buy him a breath. Odin said, and gave another. The library moaned like a ship, deciding not to sink. Ladders fell and landed as bridges. A choir of atlases hummed borders closed around the door. The card catalog, saying a small order, yanked open a drawer and coughed up a rubber stamp. Returned. The stamp flung itself at the threshold and hit with a thud that shook letters from the laugh. Returned, said the wood. Returned, agreed the floor. Returned, breathed the shelves, the dust, the broken windows smelling of wet sky. The hands faltered, the eye thinned, the door's grin chapped. Blunder wiped blood from his lip at the back of his hand and realized he was doing exactly like Thor did, which made him snort, which made Loki glance over in pleased surprise, which made the door glare harder, because mirth is a traitor to doom. Listen, Sif said, pressing the golden key against his. We link. They're light-braided. It didn't make either brighter. It made them consistent. The braid reached for the home rune again, and this time the floor hummed in harmony. Blunder felt the tune in his teeth. On 3, Thor said, as if numbers still mattered. 1. Now, Ifjafor shouted. They moved on now. Mjolnir struck the floor and rang the room like a bell for clear thinking. Sif's key drew a horizon that reminded the eye how to blink. Sivis inhaled a pause so tender it turned the children's hands to paper dolls and laid them gently on a shelf labeled make-believe. Ifja's 5 cells split, then reconverged, carrying armfuls of their own fear, which they stacked like sandbags in the doorway, where fear could do less harm keeping water out than drowning a heart. Loki did the one decent thing he rarely risked. He told the truth in a voice soft enough not to startle it. You don't want him, he told the door. You want the moment after him, when everyone despairs. He breaks better than most. But he won't break today. The eye rolled. The laugh hiccuped. Fenrir, tired of other people's strategies, went for hunger's oldest one. He let his knees bend and his head lower like submission. He let his tail dip. He made himself small as a sari. Then he exploded and met Blunder, already moving. The boy did not dodge. He chose where to be. He stepped to the side prophecy hadn't underlined, put his back to the shelf where the primer with sticky apricot jam stains waited, and brought the key up in a guard learned from no teacher, but the insistence to still be there. Fenrir's shoulders slammed the shelf. Books fell in a waterfall of lessons and lullabies. One picture book landed open between wolf and boy. A house with a red door, a child saying no to a stranger. The illustration's red door glowed. The real door flinched. Again, Odin murmured, and gave another breath to the debt. Sif pressed. Thor held. Sivas waited with the patience of mortar drying. Ifja fed the threshold a loop of her worst laugh, until even hunger lost its appetite for it. Loki squeezed his eyes shut and didn't pray. He gambled. Blunder raised his key level with his eyes. He spoke not to the door, but to the part of himself that expected to be late, to trip, to apologize for how much room he took in the world. Stand, he told that part. Stand with me? It did. The key's jagged light did not flare. It clarified. Edges sharpened until even the dust motes had outlines. The home rune brightened from a memory to a promise. The braid of gold and stubborn white cinched the room at its waist. Now, said everyone, because now is the only count that ever finishes anything. Blunder stepped forward and touched the threshold. Not the eye, not the grin, not the hands. The threshold itself. The place where choices put on coats and leave. You do not open yourself, he told the door. Not here. Not today. Not for me. The threshold shuddered. The laugh dropped 3 notes. The eye narrowed to sullen bead. The hands retreated the length of a breath, and, finding themselves less mighty at that distance, retreated another. Fenrir howled. The sound cracked a chandelier and made a fresco weep rain. He leapt again, because wolves do. Thor met him again, because thunder does. Sif braced them both, because dawn does. Odin held the price steady, because debts do. Sivas kept the pause generous but brief, because mercy does. Ifja kept not breaking, because people do. And Loki, who had once written endings like threats and sold them for laughs, watched the clumsy boy hold a line no prophecy had drawn. He let out a breath he didn't know he was saving. Well, he said, to no one and to the God he never admitted was in him. That's inconveniently beautiful. The door gathered itself for another laugh. The library beat it to sound. Returned, said the stamp, striking the oak once more. Filed, said the drawers, sliding shut. Shelved, said the ladders, aligning. Home, said the floor, glowing steady. The door did not close. It sulked. It seethed. It remembered that opening itself had felt like triumph, and now felt like paperwork. The eye blinked with the exaggerated patience of a predator willing to wait years. The grin cracked at one corner and learned the taste of splinters. Fenrir's chest heaved. His tongue showed teeth marks where he had bitten his own need. He stared at Blunder and found no feast, only a fast that made the hunger smarter. This is not done, he said, not roaring now, but promising. Neither am I, Blunder said, and was surprised to hear no tremor. Odin lowered his hands, shaking, older and less alone. Thor rolled his shoulder and winced like a man allowed to be mortal an hour a week. Sif leaned her forehead against the boy's for a breath, then stepped away with a nod that weighed as much as a crown. Sivas patted the air where the worst panic had been and smoothed it flat. Ifja counted her cells, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and smiled because they matched. Loki bowed to the shelves with a seriousness that suited him too well. The door waited. The library waited back. Dust settled. Cards returned to drawers. A picture book about a red door closed itself gently, as if not to wake a sleeping room. Blunder slid the key into his belt. It stayed warm enough to remind him, and cool enough to forgive him. He looked at the threshold and spoke one more time. Not a shout, not a plea, just the right-sized word for a boy in a library holding his ground. No. The eye dimmed to a coin. The grin held, petty and patient. The hinge sighed. The door did not close, but it did not move. Fenrir lunged like hunger given shape, jaws wide, eyes blazing, every muscle in his massive body aimed at one trembling target. Blunder. Time slowed in the way it always does right before disaster. Sif shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of the ceiling. Sivist whispered an apology that made everyone hold their breath. Ifja split into 2 versions that both screamed this was a bad idea. And Odin, cloak snapping, raised his hand to summon fury. But Thor was faster. He leapt, hammer swinging, lightning crackling in the dust-choked air. The blow struck Fenrir's shoulder mid-lunge, a crack of thunder echoing through the broken library. Sparks flew, the wolf snarled, and Blunder staggered back, eyes wide. For one miraculous heartbeat, it looked like Thor had stopped him. Then Fenrir laughed, a deep, rattling laugh that shook the beam still clinging to the ruined ceiling. "You think that hurt me, Thunderer? That was a tickle." He shook himself, chains clattering, and lunged again. Blunder raised his key in pure panic. He didn't swing it. He didn't channel it. He just held it up like a child might hold a stick against a storm. And the key bit back. Light flared from its tip, but not soft, not steady. Sharp, a burst of brilliance like teeth made of fire. Snapping outward in a sudden arc, Fenrir's jaws slammed into glow and snapped shut on nothing but light. He recoiled with a snarl, lips curling, eyes wide for first time. Blunder blinked at the key in his hand. Did it just bite him? Ollie, calm as ever, adjusted his spectacles. "Yes, your key has teeth. Fascinating." Fenrir growled, blood beading on his snout where the light had cut him. "That's mine," he snarled. "You carry what belongs to me." His voice dripped with rage. "Give it back." Blunder squeaked, clutching the key tighter. "No." His voice cracked, but the light flared again in agreement, its sharp glow daring the wolf to try. Loki clapped his hands, grinning ear to ear. "Oh, delightful. My clumsiest child just bit his brother with a stick. Prophecy has never been so entertaining." "Loki," Sif snapped, straining under the beams. "This is not entertaining." "Yes, it is," Loki insisted. The prophecy scroll, now little more than ash drifting on the wind, burned its latest words directly into the air. When thunder fails and the clumsy one's key bares its teeth, the wolf will rage and the throne will tremble. Odin's jaw tightened. He felt it too, the throne trembling, the 9 worlds groaning, the sky ripping wider above. He turned to Blunder, his voice low, heavy as prophecy itself. "You must hold, boy. Do not falter." Blunder's knees shook, his breath came in ragged bursts, but he lifted the key higher. "I'll try." Fenrir bared his real teeth this time, grinning wide, blood still fresh on his snout. "Then I'll try harder." And with that, the wolf lunged again. Fenrir lunged again, jaws wide, teeth flashing like knives in the flickering lantern light. But this time he didn't just hit Blunder's key, he bit it. His fangs closed around a burst of firelight, and instead of recoiling, he clamped down harder. Sparks sprayed, the glow hissed, and Blunder yelped as if his own bones were being chewed. "Don't let go!" Thor bellowed, swinging Mjolnir at Fenrir's flank. The hammer struck with thunder, but the wolf barely flinched. He was too busy gnawing on destiny itself. Sif cried out, her golden key faltering as the ceiling rained dust and stars. Ibja split into 3 frantic versions, one shrieking, one taking notes, and one declaring, "This future tastes terrible." Ollie muttered something about textbook sibling rivalry taken too literally. And Sivist, poor Sivist, felt the panic swelling in their chest. They clutched their key, trembling, whispering, "Stop, stop, stop." The pause that followed was not silence. It was absence. Time itself hiccuped. The dust froze in the air. Thor's hammer hung mid-swing. Fenrir's jaws held still around a biting glow. Even Odin's cloak stopped mid-whip. Only Sivist moved, their voice shaking as they whispered into the unbearable stillness. "I can't hold this long." Blunder gasped, blinking at the frozen wolf inches from his face. His voice cracked as he said, "Thank you. Really, thank you." Sivist's eyes widened. No one had ever thanked them for pausing the unbearable before. Their key glowed brighter, steadier. The silence stretched a heartbeat longer. And Loki, oh Loki, strolled to frozen air like it was a garden path, whistling cheerfully. He poked at Thor's unmoving hammer, tugged his frozen braid, and squinted at Fenrir's bare teeth. Impressive work, Sivist," he said, clapping them on the shoulder. "Truly inspired. Almost makes me wonder which side I'm on." Sivist blinked. "What?" "Well, technically, I'm supposed to be rooting for prophecy. Doors opening, wolves rising, crowns toppling, etc. Very dramatic, very inevitable. He grinned, eyes glinting. But my son standing with a toothy key? My other son chewing on said key? My other children freezing time by accident? It's chaos, and chaos is my one true loyalty. You're not helping, Sivas whispered. On the contrary, Loki said brightly, I'm helping myself. The paws began to crack. Dust trembled in midair. Whispers slithered back into motion. Sivas gasped, clutching their key tighter. I can't hold it. And time snapped forward. Fenrir's jaws clenched, sparks exploding in every direction. Blunder screamed, the key blazing brighter than ever. Thor's hammer finished its arc, crashing into Fenrir's side. Sif's key flared, catching another chunk of falling ceiling. Ibja collapsed into a single self, panting, eyes wild. And the prophecy scroll, which should have been nothing but ash, flared one last line into the choking air. When time itself hesitates, the wolf will bite light, and the trickster will forget which side he's on. Loki clapped, delighted. Yes, exactly like that. Oh, I do love it when the universe quotes me. Fenrir pulled back at last, spitting sparks, eyes burning hotter. Enough games. I will devour him. Blunder, trembling, whispered, Not if I bite back again. And the key in his hand roared with fire. The library was chaos dressed as prophecy. Dust swirled like storm clouds. Stars kept falling to the broken roof, and the great door at the far end yawned wider, its eye gleaming with hungry delight. Through it came the sound of laughter, not mocking, not cruel, but booming with the joy of inevitability. Blunder stood at the center of it all, key blazing. His arms shook, his legs wobbled, but when Fenrir lunged again, he didn't stumble. He lifted the key and let it bite harder. The light snapped outward, jagged and sharp, like a row of blazing teeth. Fenrir's jaws crashed into it. For the first time, the wolf flinched. He growled, pulling back, blood staining his lips where the glow had cut deeper. The shells gasped. Yes, shells gasped. They had seen plenty of battles, but never one where clumsiness gnawed prophecy's favorite wolf. Blunder trembled, barely holding on, but his voice cracked defiantly. You don't get to eat me. Not yet. Fenrir snarled. You're mine, little mistake. That key, that glow, even your courage, it belongs to me. Odin's voice cut through the chaos. No, he belongs to Asgard. He stepped forward, cloak flaring, eye blazing. His hand rose high, not to strike, but to offer. For the first time, Odin looked at Blunder as if the boy were not an accident, but a weapon. Give it to me, Odin commanded. The key, with my power behind it, I can seal the door, bind the wolf, end this prophecy before it breathes. The library shuddered. Even the door seemed to pause, as if curious to see if the boy would hand over his teeth. Blunder blinked, terrified. His knuckles were white on the glowing handle. But if I give it to you, what happens to me? Odin's jaw tightened. That is not the question. The question is what happens to the 9 worlds if you don't. Sif's voice broke through, raw with strain as her key struggled to hold the roof. Don't trust him, Blunder. Once he takes it, you'll be nothing to him. Just another sacrifice. Thor growled, hammer raised. Father, no. He's done more than any of us tonight. Don't steal from him. Loki, of course, grinned. Oh, what a delicious dilemma. Give the key to the one-eyed tyrant, or keep it and risk being eaten by your brother wolf. Honestly, I couldn't have written it better myself. The prophecy scroll, stubborn as ever, bursts into flame one more time. When the clumsy one holds teeth and the high one begs for them, a bargain will split the 9 worlds. Blunder swallowed hard. His eyes darted between Odin, Fenrir, and the laughing door. His voice cracked. I don't. And then the door laughed louder. Its hinges groaned, its carvings writhed, and the crack yawned wide enough to show more than an eye. A grin appeared, vast, endless, sharp enough to cut through fate itself. Fenrir's fur bristled, his tail lashed. It's almost here, almost free. Odin clenched his fists, his outstretched hand shaking. He had never begged before, but now his eye burned with desperation. Give me the key, boy. Blunder's breath came in ragged gasps. He clutched the biting light to his chest, shaking his head. No, not yet. And the grin behind the door widened, as if that answer pleased it most of all. Odin was not accustomed to being told no. Mortals bent the knee, gods obeyed, even storms listened when he barked. But now, in the ruined library with stars dripping to the torn ceiling, a trembling boy clutching a biting key had dared to refuse him. Blunder's voice cracked, but his grip stayed firm. Not yet. Odin's cloak snapped like thunder. His eye blazed. You foolish child, do you not see what hangs above us? The sky itself is splitting. The 9 worlds tremble on the edge of ruin. Give me the key and I will end this. But Blunder shook his head again. You already tried ending things. You broke the ceiling. You broke the shelves. You break everything. His knees trembled, but his voice steadied. I won't let you break this too. The library gasped. Yes, again, because nobody had ever spoken to Odin like that and lived to tell the tale. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir, torn between awe and terror. Sif, bleeding and weary, whispered, Good boy. Sivas clutched their key, silence thickening like a shield. Ifja covered her face with both hands and mumbled, This is either very brave or very stupid. Loki, of course, applauded. Marvelous, he crowed. The boy denies the All-Father while standing in front of a laughing door. If prophecy doesn't give him his own saga after this, I will. Fenrir snarled, pacing. His eyes gleamed with hunger. Enough talk. That glow is mine. That key is mine. That boy is mine. His chains rattled like drums of war. And then the door decided it was time to join the conversation. Its grin widened, stretching impossibly across the oak. The wolves and serpents carved into its surface writhed, twisting, reshaping. With a sound like a sigh from the roots of Yggdrasil itself, the door opened wider, and the thing behind it revealed more than an eye. Hands. Dozens of them. Some human, some monstrous, some clawed, some delicate. They reached through the crack, grasping for the air, for the shelves, for the trembling light of Blunder's key. The library screamed. The shelves toppled. Scrolls burst into flame without being touched. Blunder staggered, clutching his key tighter. What is it? Sivas whispered, their paws stretching too long. It's everything we tried not to remember. The prophecy scroll, almost entirely ash, burned its last words into the rafters. When the High One loses his patience and the boy refuses again, the door will show its hands. Odin raised his spearless hand, fury storming through him. Then I will burn it all. Door, prophecy, wolf, everything. Better ashes and chains broken. But the eye and the grin behind the door only laughed louder, the hands writhing as if they were clapping. And for the first time, even Fenrir looked unsure. The door was no longer content with cracks and laughter. Its hands, dozens and hundreds, reached further into the ruined library, grasping, clawing, groping for anything pulled back through the gap. Some clutched at broken beams, dragging splinters into the dark. Others scraped across shelves, snatching scrolls that had never been written. A few brushed across the gods themselves, cold as moonlight, hot as fire, both at once. Thor swung Mjolnir wildly, smashing hands left and right, each one bursting into smoke when struck. Back, fiends, he roared. Back, or I'll smash the whole door into kindling. But for every hand he destroyed, 2 more slipped through. Sif cried out as one sees her ankle. Her golden key flared, burning the hand to ash, but her knees buckled under the weight of collapsing roof. Ifja screamed as 3 hands tugged at her cloak, each one insisting on a different possible future. She multiplied into 4 cells at once, all yelling contradictory advice. Sivas whispered stop, and for half a heartbeat the hands froze, but only long enough to remind everyone that silence could not hold forever. And Blunder, poor, trembling Blunder, stood at the center of it, the glow of his key blazing so bright the hands all turned toward him. Every claw, every palm, every grip reached for the boy. Fenrir saw it too. His eyes gleamed with savage delight. Yes, he growled. They want you, little accident. But you were never meant to hold that power. I was. His chains clattered as he lunged, not at the door this time, but at Blunder himself. Thor moved to intercept hammer rays, but 3 hands shot from the door and wrapped around his arm, holding him back with impossible strength. Odin barked a command and hurled his power at the door, but the hands caught it, twisted it, and swallowed it whole. Loki laughed, of course. Oh, this is exquisite. Hands everywhere. Chaos on all sides, and my clumsy child glowing like the last lantern at the end of the world. This is the stuff of sagas. Blunder's chest heaved. He clutched the biting key, eyes darting between the wolf charging him, the hands reaching for him, and the All-Father demanding control. His voice cracked, small but steady. I have to choose. The prophecy scroll, down to its final cinders, flared once more. When the hands reach and the wolf moves, the clumsy one will face the choice that crowns or dooms. Blunder swallowed hard. His knuckles whitened on the key. Fenrir's jaws opened wide, chains rattling like war drums. The hands reached closer, closer, desperate to drag him in. And Blunder whispered the one word none of them expected. No. The key blazed, sharper than before, its teeth bared in light. The door no longer laughed. It surged. The crack yawned wider, spilling light that was not light, shadow that was not shadow. Its hands lunged like a tide, faster, stronger, hungrier than before. The eye flared until the library drowned in its glare. Letters blistered on spines. Ink fled margins. Drawers shook. Catalog cards fluttering into the air like frantic birds. Blunder, trembling, raised his key again. The glow flickered, faltered, then flared with sharp defiance. I said no, he whispered, his voice breaking, and I still mean it. The key bit back once more, its jagged light snapping to the first wave of hands. Palms dissolved, claws curled to smoke. But for every one destroyed, 3 more followed, slithering from the crack like roots that had smelled blood. Thor fought beside him, Mjolnir smashing hands to ash. Every swing rattled the shelves, shaking loose scrolls that had slept for centuries. Sif held her golden key aloft, her body trembling under the collapsing ceiling. Her shoulders bowed but never broke, the glow of her key carving arcs of light through the choking dust. Sivis whispered pauses, freezing handfuls of claws for half a breath. That half a breath mattered. It was enough for Thor to strike, for Blunder to breathe, for hope to steal another heartbeat. Ifja multiplied into frantic versions, each shouting a different plan, none of them helpful, all of them desperate. One cried for retreat, another demanded advance, a third prayed, a fourth cursed, and the fifth laughed through tears as if mocking death itself. And Odin saw the truth. His own power had failed. His spear was gone. His command of the 9 worlds trembled with every widening crack in the sky above. His voice, once storm, now broke in silence. For the first time, he realized that even all-fathers are not enough. So Odin did the one thing he had always avoided. He paid. He tore a strip from his cloak, not cloth but essence, the very weave of his fate. Years he had not yet lived, victories he had not yet claimed. The thread smoked in his fingers. His hand shook as he pressed it against a rushing tide of hands, shouting a word so old even the shelves flinched. The strip of his own destiny burned, sealing the surge for a heartbeat. Just a heartbeat. The library froze in awe. Even Fenrir blinked, startled, chains slackening for a moment. But the price was carved instantly. Odin's eye dimmed, his shoulders sagged. The storm in his voice cracked. His power bled out with the strip he had surrendered, and the air smelled faintly of pine sap and ash. Blunder turned, wide-eyed. What did you do? Odin's jaw tightened. What I should have done long ago. Paid what prophecy always demanded. His gaze softened, yes, softened, on the trembling boy. But you must still refuse. Do not yield, no matter the cost. The prophecy scroll, or rather the ashes of it, swirled into one last glowing phrase on the smoke-filled air. When the boy refuses again and the High One pays, the 9 worlds will owe their breath to both. The words lingered like constellations before dissolving into soot. The hand surged anew, hungrier than before, tearing through Odin's sacrifice as if it were a morsel. The eye flared, the grin split wider. The fury pressed forward. And Blunder, shaking, raised his key a third time. His voice cracked, small but fierce. Still no. The door roared, louder than any wolf, louder than any thunder. And Odin, weakened, dropped to one knee. The marble groaned under his weight. Thor stepped in front of him, taking 3 grasping hands on his arm and shattering them with a grimace. "Bite on something that bites back," he growled. Sif lowered her key until it touched Blunder's. The metals hummed together, light braiding into a shared defiance. For a heartbeat, the tide faltered. Sivis leaned close, whispering a pause into the boy's ear. A wall of silence slammed across the flood, freezing its front rank. Ifja's fractured cells circled them, their contradictions weaving confusion into the enemy's rhythm. Loki stepped forward at last, Shadow sloughing from him. "Prophecy hates a joke," he muttered, and knotted Shadow and Light together into a rope that tangled hunger with hunger. The tide stumbled. The crack retaliated with crueler weapons. Memories twisted into nooses, promises whispered like lullabies. Blunder flinched, nearly snared by his own doubts. But Sivis tore the rope apart with silence, and Sif steadied him with dawnlight. Blunder drew breath, tasting dust and something sweet beneath it. Old glue, the scent of pressed flowers and forgotten books. The library had held children's hands, sheltered light, guarded endings. He understood. "Not for me," he whispered. "For you." He stepped forward, into the storm. Keys flared, words bent, the tide shrieked. And once again his refusal struck like a hammer. The eye filmed over. The grin faltered. The door recoiled, not defeated but unsettled. The ceiling stopped widening. A book shut itself with a sigh. Fenrir snarled, chains humming. "Delay," he spat. "Delay." Odin echoed, almost smiling. But in delay, seeds take root. In delay, a no becomes a habit. The library whispered its truth. Through dust and wood and ink, endings can change. So can beginnings. And Blunder, clutching his key, shaking but alive, whispered one last time, "No." The door shuddered. The fury dimmed. And for now it stayed shut. The door no longer laughed. It surged. The crack yawned wider, spilling light that was not light, shadow that was not shadow. Its hands lunged like a tide, faster, stronger, hungrier than before. The eye flared until the library drowned in its glare. Letters blistered on spines. Ink fled margins and beaded like sweat along title pages. The floor, mosaic of runes and catalog marks, thrummed with a heartbeat not its own. Blunder, trembling, raised his key again. The glow flickered, faltered, then flared with sharp defiance. "I said no," he whispered, his voice breaking, "and I still mean it." The key bit back once more, its jagged light snapping to the first wave of hands. Palms dissolved, claws curled to smoke. But for every one destroyed, 3 more followed, crawling from the crack's vowel, from the consonant grin, from the white-hot pupil where meaning should never have lived. They came grasping for names, for promises, for the softest place in any heart that still remembered wanting. Thor fought beside him, Mjolnir smashing hands to ash. Each strike rang like thunder in a closed book, echoing from shelf to shelf. Sif held her golden key aloft, her body trembling under the collapsing ceiling. Dust stung her eyes, but she set her jaw, the arc of her key drawing a narrow crescent of dawn through the murk. Sivis whispered pauses, freezing handfuls of claws for half a breath. Those breaths mattered. They were islands in flood. Ifja multiplied into frantic versions, each shouting a different plan. None of them helpful, all of them honest. Pull back. Press forward. Circle left. Pray. Laugh so it can't feed. Their voices spinning a wheel that threw sparks but found no purchase. And Odin saw the truth. His own power had failed. His spear was gone. His command of the 9 worlds trembled with every widening crack in the sky above. The stars themselves became annotations in a margin that no longer obeyed his hand. For the first time, he realized that even all-fathers are not enough. So Odin did the one thing he had always avoided. He paid. He tore a strip from his cloak, not cloth but essence, the very weave of his fate. Winters he had yet to cause, victories he had yet to claim. The thread smoked in his fingers. His hand shook as he pressed it against the rushing tide of hands, shouting a word so old even the shelves flinched, bindings creaking in instinctive bow. The strip of his own destiny burned, sealing the surge for a heartbeat. Just a heartbeat. The library froze in awe. Even Fenrir blinked, startled, chain slackening half an inch. Mjolnir hung in the air at the bottom of Thor's swing like a sun, deciding whether to rise. But the price was carved instantly. Odin's eye dimmed, his shoulders sagged. The storm in his voice cracked. A cough, small human, stole the edge of his breath. His power bled out with the strip he had surrendered, and the air smelled briefly of pine sap and funeral smoke. Blunder turned, wide-eyed. What did you do?" Odin's jaw tightened. "What I should have done long ago. Paid what prophecy always demanded." His gaze softened, yes, softened on the trembling boy. "But you must still refuse. Do not yield, no matter the cost." The prophecy scroll, or rather the ashes of it, swirled into one last glowing phrase on the smoke-filled air. When the boy refuses again and the High One pays, the 9 worlds will owe their breath to both. The words rotated like constellations before thinning to cinder streaks and vanishing into the open wound of the ceiling. The hand surged anew, hungrier than before, tearing through Odin's sacrifice as if it were a morsel. The eye flared, the grin split wider. The fury pressed forward. The door had learned their rhythm. It struck between Thor's swings, beneath Sif's crescents, around Sivas' pauses. It reached for ankles, for wrists, for the shakable faith behind any shouted oath. And Blunder, shaking, raised his key a third time. His voice cracked, small but fierce. "Still no." The door roared, louder than any wolf, louder than any thunder. And Odin, weakened, dropped to one knee. The marble under him remembered kings and still did not forgive. "Back!" Thor barked, but he did not fall back himself. He stepped in front of Odin, taking 3 grasping hands on his forearm and crushing them with a grimace that left blood on his teeth. "Come, beasts," he said through that red grin. "Bite on something that bites back." Sif pivoted to Blunder. "With me?" She lowered her key until it touched his. The 2 metals did not ring. They hummed, a harmonia older than battle, light-braided, for a heartbeat. The tide's front edge hesitated, miscounted, tripped. Sivas leaned in, mouth almost at Blunder's ear. "Hold it right there." The keeper paused his breathe, and the command became a bar line laid across the flood. A row of hands froze mid-reach, hunger trapped inside its own motion. If just 5 selves ran a circle around them, each tossing a fragment of their fear outward like bait. The door's eye twitched, tracking, reconsidering, wanting to swallow laughter and curses and prayers in a single gulp. It hesitated again. "Now," Sif said. They pushed together. Sif's surety, Sivas' pause, if just fractured courage, Thor's brutal timing, and Blunder's refusal like a nail hammered through all of it. The keys screamed. The scream was not pain but effort. The front rank of the tide imploded, sank, leaving a momentary trough where hungry darkness sloshed and found nothing to grip. From that trough, Loki stepped. He had been standing in a shadow that clung to him as if it owned a lien on his name. Now he shrugged it off like an unpopular coat. "You are all doing this the hard way," he said, almost to himself, almost smiling, "which means it might work." "Loki," Thor warned. "Peace, brother hammers." Loki did not approach the crack. He faced the shelves. "You," he told the library, "are not merely a room. You're a witness. So witness for us. Remember closed doors. Remember endings that held." Books fluttered. A ledger fell open on a high balcony and bled numbers like rain. An atlas flipped to a map of a sea with no shore. A child's primer whispered the alphabet backward, ending on a soft A that sounded like breath leaving a chest. Loki raised 2 fingers and, with the exaggerated delicacy of a pickpocket, drew a thread of shadow from the gap between 2 tomes. He twined it with a braid of light teas from Sif's key and knotted both around the nearest hand that had found the courage to advance. The hand spasmed and, confused, clutched itself. The hands behind it grabbed for purchase and found only more hands. Hunger tangled itself in hunger. The tide stumbled. "Keep it unfunny," Loki muttered, in his mouth, traitor that it was, twitched anyway. Prophecy hates a joke. Fenrir lunged against his chains, rage making snow of his breath. Trickster, he snarled. You would bind what devours. How many times will you pretend rope can outthink teeth? As many times as it takes. Loki said, not looking at him. Besides, I've learned a few things about chains. The crack spat out a memory, Blunder's own, not his best, of slipping, of failing, of a village square with faces turned away. The hand shaped that memory into a noose and threw it. Blunder ducked too late. Civis slapped the rope with a word that was all silence and no sound. The rope forgot it was a rope, frayed into unhappy mist, and went searching for a different purpose. Blunder drew breath like someone breaking surface. He tasted dust and something sweet beneath it. Old glue, apricot jam from a book pressed long ago by sticky fingers. He knew then why the library fought. It had held the hands of children. It had smuggled light to anyone who asked. It had kept endings safe until someone deserved to read them. Not for me, he whispered to the key, to the shelves, to the crack, to the gods. For you. He stepped forward. Sif hissed a warning. Thor swore. Odin's head lifted. Loki stopped smiling. Blunder went anyway, into the splash zone of hunger, into the glare that emptied courage, into the reach of hands that had learned his name. The key warmed his palm until heat became pain. He did not let go. If you want me, he told the door, you take me as I am, falling foolish late loud and saying no. The door blinked. The library shuddered. The next rush of hands came lower, smaller, child height, reaching for the ankle of a boy who would always be teased. Blunder's heart flinched. He stopped anyway. He lowered the key until its teeth touched that reaching palm. I am not your food, he said, and neither is anyone who ever felt like me. The hand did not burn. It withered, yes, but not in smoke. It became a paper cut, a tiny sting, a lesson one survives. It dropped, and with it, a dozen taller hands behind it unclenched as if embarrassed. Odin, on one knee, exhaled like a winter birch relieved of snow. Good, he said, and it was not command but blessing. The door retaliated with speed and cruelty. The floor cracked. Catalog drawers shot open. Cards founaining. Author, title, subject. Each card a name to be stolen. Hands dove, greedy to clutch, to erase, to swallow every index of who had ever been. Mine, Loki said, and pinched his fingers. The cards halted in midair, swarmed his wrists like white moths and, with a flick of his smile, whisked themselves up to the rafters where even hunger hesitated to climb. You don't get to eat the table of contents, he told the door. That's gauche. Enough quips, Thor grunted. He drove Mjolnir into the floor between Blunder and the surge. The shock made a ring that rolled outward like a ripple on a lake, except this lake was made of wanting, and ripples broke one into smaller ones that could be stepped over. Sif, jaw set, lifted her key until its golden edge drank what little starlight still sifted to the torn ceiling. Remember dawn, she told it, and the key obeyed. A blade of morning stood between Blunder and the next wave. Hands reached for it and recoiled, not burned, but chastened, like thieves stepping across a church threshold and remembering, briefly, their mothers. If just 5 circled tighter. One wept until the tears became marbles that tripped rushing claws. One cursed in a language older than runes, and her profanity chipped teeth from a grasping fist. One laughed, and the laughter sounded like a door closing softly on a sleeping house. The tide, for a moment, felt rude and drew back. One prayed with eyes open. One finally shouted a plan that made sense. We give it something it cannot swallow. What? Blunder asked, not looking away from the eye. Debt, said Odin, rising inch by inch against his failure. A true one. Mine. No, Thor and Sif said together. Yes, Odin said, with a tiredness that had shape and weight and name. I paid a strip. The debt is larger. He raised both hands, empty, palms open a crack. You wanted my command, he told the door. Take instead my claims. Every right I ever held to decide the fate of another, gone. The word fell and did not echo. It was eaten by the floor like water by dry moss. The air shifted. The library leaned. Not in approval, not exactly, but as a witness bearing weight on a signature line. The eye focused. The grin lowered, unsure. Hands reached and found not power to taste, but renunciation to choke on. The tide coughed. "Now, you," Odin said to Blunder, not as a king but as a student begging another to finish the lesson. Blunder swallowed. The key's heat had become a steady ache. He lifted it and, with every tremble of his arm, drew the jagged light into a shape he had never practiced. A lock not for the door, but for himself. "You cannot have what I do not give," he told the crack, and the lock clicked, not closed, not open, but set to a name only he could speak. The eye narrowed, furious. The next surge came not as hands, but as whispers. Promises of ease, of admiration, of a future where he would never trip on a single step again, where keys would turn themselves and doors would open with applause. Sivis stepped in front of those whispers and scattered commas across them. Each promise stuttered, paused, lost momentum, forgot the end of its sentence. "Finish it," Loki breathed, not because he trusted endings, but because he adored them when they surprised him. Blunder brought the key down. He did not strike the door. He struck the floor. Specifically, the intersection where the catalog numbers met the oldest rune for home. The sound was not a crack, but a page turning. Light did not blast. It rose, like breath after weeping. Hands wilted. Whisper spoiled. It raged. But its rage had nowhere to nest. The grin, robbed of its punchline, straightened into a wound. The ceiling's tear did not mend, but it stopped widening. The library took a breath big enough to rattle dust from beams that had forgotten youth. Somewhere on a top shelf, a book closed itself with careful gratitude. Fenrir snarled and yanked at his bonds until the links sang like dark bells. "This is delay," he spat, "not victory." "Delay?" Odin agreed, almost smiling. But in delay, children grow. In delay, seeds take root. In delay, a no becomes a habit. Thor planted Mjolnir's head on the crack floor and leaned on it like a farmer on a fence post. "I'll take habit over prophecy," he said. "Habits resist." Sif put a hand on Blunder's shoulder. He startled and then did not pull away. "You held," she said simply. Ifja's 5 cells merged, dizzy for a moment, then steadied, cheeks wet, mouth crooked with relief that looked suspiciously like pride. Sivist exhaled a silence the room was pleased to keep. Loki tipped an invisible hat to the shelves. "Well, read," he told them. A rolled-up chapbook dropped from a balcony, bounced off his shoulder, and landed at Blunder's feet. On its paper belly, in a child's hand, someone had once written, "You can say no twice." Blunder picked it up. It weighed almost nothing and everything he had. He looked at the door, not closed, not laughing, not winning, and said, not loudly but with the certainty of muscle that has learned its move, "No." The crack shivered. The eye filmed over. The grin forgot why it had been carved. Odin straightened fully, Odin before and, somehow, lighter. He bowed his head to Blunder. Not a ruler to a subject, not a general to a soldier, but a debtor to the refusal that had just paid his bill. The library listened to its own beams, to the cards returning to drawers, to the hush finding shape. When it finally spoke, it did so through the long sigh of a door that will not open for weather or whim. "Endings can change," it whispered, echoing an old truth newly earned. So could beginnings. The crack remained. The war did not vanish. Fenrir's chain still gleamed with appetite. Prophecy did not die. It muttered in its sleep and rolled to the cold side of the bed. But the room, the battlefield, the witness, the friend of children and thieves and queens, was still a library. It had not been eaten. Blunder slid the key into his belt, hand lingering on the hilt. He was still shaking. He would shake for a while. But the shake no longer belonged to fear alone. It was also the tremor of something newly rooted. Again, Thor asked, half a jest, half a promise. "If it comes," Blunder said. "It will," Fenrir promised. "And we will," Sif replied. Odin lifted his empty hands and found they were not empty after all. They held space. For others, for refusal. For a future he no longer believed he could decree. "The price stands," he said quietly. "Let it bind me where my power could not." Loki, already backing into a cooperative shadow, winked. "Try not to prophesy about that," he told Odin. You ruin all my fun when you get earnest. A star peered through the torn ceiling, bold as a punctuation point at the end of a dangerous sentence. The doors I rolled away from it, sulking. Blunder looked up, then down, then around at the books. "Thank you," he said to the shelves. One by one, they settled deeper into their posts, as if someone had tucked them in. The tide, for now, clung to its edge. The library kept breathing. Somewhere outside, in one of the 9 worlds, a child who would never meet Blunder told a stubborn truth to a cruel friend and did not apologize for it. The crack twitched, annoyed and quieted, and the key, his key, cooled to warmth. He touched it, not to claim, but to remember. The door did not laugh. For now, the library was no longer a room. It was a battlefield between memory and prophecy, between hunger and refusal, between what should never have been and what refused to stop being anyway. The ceiling was gone. Stars spilled to the tear above like spilled ink across a forgotten manuscript, and each constellation looked down as if taking notes of its own. The shelves, though splintered and cracked, still leaned forward in silent vigilance, for libraries never miss an ending. They record even the screams between the lines. Dust floated like ash from burned chronicles, each mote carrying the echo of a word no one had spoken in centuries. Odin knelt, the All-Father, who had bent worlds and crowned gods, who had traded eye for knowledge and thrones for wisdom, knelt in the rubble, cloak torn, one knee pressed into broken marble. His single eye dimmed as if the stars themselves had retreated from it. His sacrifice had burned a hole in him that no throne could fill again, a hollow large enough to hold the silence of every prayer unanswered. He did not rise. He did not command. He simply breathed, tasting the ruin he had helped shape. Blunder stood, shaking, bleeding, choking on dust that tasted of forgotten myths, but standing. His key, no longer just metal, but an idea made visible, flared brighter than ever, jagged light snapping at every hand that lunged for him. Each bite echoed like defiance itself, a stubborn heartbeat hammering against prophecy's ribs. He felt the weight of every step that had led him here. The mistakes, the stumbles, the clumsiness that earned his name. Yet in the tremor of his grip, there was a steadiness no training could grant. It was not heroism. It was refusal. Fenrir howled, chains rattling as he pressed against the tide. The sound was older than iron, older than fear. It shook the ink from the pages, still clinging to the shelves. "He cannot hold it," the wolf's voice cracked the air. "He will break, and when he breaks, the door is mine." His fangs dripped not saliva but memory, fragments of every oath the gods had sworn and broken. His paws tore grooves into the floor, claws sparking against ancient runes, pulling prophecy toward its favorite meal, inevitability. Thor slammed Mjolnir into another wave of claws, hands no longer wholly physical, part shadow, part hunger, part echo of everything the door had devoured. Sparks flew like meteors. "Not while I breathe," he thundered, though his arms shook, though his knuckles were raw beneath the gauntlets. His breath came in steam, and each exhale carved runes into the cold air, runes that cracked as soon as they formed. Even thunder phrased at the edge of prophecy. Sif staggered, her golden key trembling as the last beams of the roof sagged. Her hair, once a sunlit banner, hung heavy with dust and sweat, yet she raised her head. Around her, the fragments of her own voice glimmered like glass, every vow she had made to keep the door sealed. Sivas whispered pauses so heavy they bent the air, freezing whole clusters of hands in place before they shattered like brittle ice. If just split into 5, each one a mirror of a single human response. One weeping, one cheering, one cursing, one laughing, one praying. They moved in a spiral, a chorus of contradictions, circling the key's light. And Loki watched, his grin gone, his eyes sharp, his fingers twitching with 100 possible lies. He whispered to no one, "Not even I could have written this." In his voice lay both envy and dread. Envy of a story escaping its author, dread of a world without script. For a trickster, freedom was both feast and famine. The door's eye widened, glaring. Its grin bent lower, dripping shadow like blood from an unseen wound. The hands surged one final time, furious, desperate, pulling themselves from the cracks between worlds. The roar that followed shook not just the library, Not just the 9 worlds, but the roots of Yggdrasil itself, sending tremors into every future branch. Even the stars above flickered, as if pausing to see whether they would still exist when this moment ended, and Blunder shouted back. I said no. The word ripped through the hall like a spear, like a page torn from Destiny's book. It was not a command, but a wound he opened in inevitability. The key in his hand bared every tooth of his light, snapping in a storm of fire and defiance. The glow spread to the shelves, the rafters, the cracked sky itself. Every hand it touched withered, folding into smoke and ink. The grin split into a scream that tasted of old bargains. The eye flared wide, then blinked shut, a final punctuation mark on a sentence no one wanted to read aloud. The door slammed closed, not politely, but with a violence that rippled across every rune carved in its frame. The echo was so deep it pressed tears from every eye, even Fenrir's. The library groaned. The shelves sighed, releasing 1,000 unread breaths. The dust settled, its patterns forming runes of gratitude too small for mortals to see. The last whispers dissolved into silence like ink in water, and then quiet. Blunder collapsed to his knees, the key dimming in his grasp until it was no brighter than a candle's end. His chest heaved, his eyes streamed, but he was alive. He could feel every bruise, every splinter of fear still lodged in him, but beneath it all a heartbeat steady in his own. Odin, still kneeling, looked at him with something no one expected. Respect. Well done, he said softly, voice like torn parchment finding a final word. Clumsy one, well done. In that tone was no pity, only recognition. The All-Father seeing, for once, someone else's sacrifice. Fenrir snarled, fury burning in his eyes, but even fury trembled at the edges. This isn't over, he spat, though the chains hummed with a new weight, as if the library itself had decided to hold him. No, Loki murmured, stepping forward at last, his silhouette flickering like a candle unsure of its flame. But for once, maybe it doesn't have to be over the way prophecy said. His smile was small, almost human, as if the trickster had glimpsed a trick he'd never thought to play. The prophecy scroll was gone. No ashes, no smoke, no words left to command them. Only silence, rich and strange, the kind of silence that waits to be rewritten. The library, broken but unbowed, whispered its last truth. Endings can change. The sound was softer than paper turning. Yet it reached every corner of the hall, a benediction and a challenge at once. Blunder clutched his key, trembling. He looked at the gods, at the wolf, at the All-Father himself, and whispered, I didn't mean to be here, but I'm glad I was. His voice cracked but did not break, and the words rose like smoke toward the tear in the ceiling where stars still watched. And somewhere, deep in the silence where laughter had lived, the door stayed shut. For now,